Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. For some backstory, this happened in July of 2008, when I was doing a road trip across some southern states. I only had a couple weeks before I would begin university, and I had just moved on from a breakup, so I decided to go on a solo road trip before summer break ended. My plan was to begin in Nashville, Tennessee, camp at some national parks in Alabama, go to a beach or two in Florida, and then finish off with Baton Rouge, Louisiana. At this point of the trip, I was in Alabama. The first national park I intended to go to in Alabama was the Bankhead National Forest, which, if you've ever seen it on a map or in person, you'd know is fairly big and desolate. But I liked it that way, because I don't get to see a whole lot of genuine nature where I live. Anyways, I get to the national forest at around mid-morning, so between 9 and 11 a.m., and I basically do all of the stuff that a nature-loving person would do at a national forest, like hiking, fishing, etc. At around 7 p.m. or so, it starts getting dark, so I find a camping area and begin pitching up my tent for the night. When looking around, I noticed that there were only 2 other tents in the whole camping area, one of which packed up and left right as I arrived. In the slight brightness from the setting sun, I see the silhouette of a person sitting up in the single remaining tent, not even moving an inch. This gave me the impression that they were staring at me, but I just didn't pay any mind to it and continued on with making my tent. It's right when I sit down in front of the fire I made that I truly take in how quiet it is outside, considering that for all I knew, it was just me and the other person in the whole camping area. There just wasn't that much sound from any of the wildlife, which made me a little unnerved. As time passed, I realized that my firewood stash was dwindling, so I went into the surrounding tree line with my flashlight to get some more. I guess I got carried away because before I knew it, I was a couple 100 feet into the tree line, a little ways away from the camping area. As I begin to walk back, I realized that it wasn't the same path I originally took, as where I was walking would bring me right where the other person's tent was. I turned off my flashlight as to not startle whoever was in there and started walking by the tent, but not too close. At this point, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and when I walked near the person's tent, I took a quick glance, and what I saw had now made me completely unnerved. In the moonlight, I saw the person sitting straight up in the tent, just as I saw it when I first saw it a couple hours earlier. Not moving an inch, not making a sound at all. I wasn't close enough to make out exact features, but close enough to confirm that this was a human being and not like a pile of equipment or something. Keep in mind that the surrounding nature was quiet beforehand, so if this person had previously lied down and then sat up, I would have been able to hear it. The only explanation I could think of would be that this person had literally been sitting there, in their tent, motionless for several hours, because I never heard anything come from this tent since I arrived. I took this all in as I was walking by the tent. I never stopped or even looked back. When I got back to my campsite, I called it a night right then and there, dunked water on my fire, and went to bed. Laying there, questions like, did that car that left right when I came here have something to do with this? And semi-jokingly, is this guy a drug addict who's going to rob me in my sleep? Ran through my head. Then I fell asleep. I woke up around a couple hours later, not sure to what at first, since the had almost left my mind. I almost began to sit up in my sleeping bag, but caught myself when I saw that same person that I saw before, sitting a couple inches front of my tent. I had to try extremely hard both to keep quiet and not have a heart attack right then and there. The person stood there, absolutely as motionless as before, with their shadow casting across my tent. I closed my eyes, blinking away fearful tears, hoping for whoever this was to go away, but the person stayed there, looking into my tent. At this point, I prayed to God that they never noticed that I had woken up. I don't know when, but eventually I had fallen back to sleep and woke up just when the sun was rising. I opened my eyes for a brief moment, just enough for confirmation that there wasn't anyone at my tent. I would lay there for at least another 15 minutes, still fearful that the person could be close, but eventually mustered up the courage to zip open my tent. I took a quick glance at other campsite, and the tent was still there, but with its flap open and from where I was looking, no one inside. This person was still out there, probably watching me for all I knew. I didn't even try to disassemble my tent as I just took out all the stakes, stuffed the whole thing into my trunk, and started to book it out of there like I was trying to break a record. When I was getting to open my car door, however, I stopped, and I saw that the words, "You shouldn't cry," was finger-drawn on the sheen of dirt on my driver's side window. Questions still come to my mind every once in a while about the whole thing. I saw some guy leaving in a car soon after I got to the camping area. Did he have any connections to this person? How was the person standing so perfectly still, but at the same time felt like they could attack me at any second? Was it just some hillbilly trying scare one single guy they didn't even know? It was 11 years ago, so I'll probably never know. Hi, my name is Boreal. I live in a family of 3, me, Boreal, being the middle child, 14, and Wade, 25. My brother is the oldest, he's in college, and Hermit, 6, he's the youngest. My dad died when me and Wade were kids. My mom, Sammy, 48, is dating a man, Jeremiah, which is the reason Hermit exists. A year ago, when my brother was coming back from college, we planned on going on a camping trip to the San Jacinto Mountains. We live in California, so if you live in California and are reading this story, then you might know what I'm talking about. Get ready, this is a long story. Currently, I'm 13, so only a year ago. Me and my brother eagerly waited for my brother to knock on the door. Then he did. I bolted to the door and jumped on my brother. "Boreal, wait till I get inside," Wade said. He set me down on the floor and brought in his bags. He rolled them on the floor, and my mom embraced Wade. I smiled, and Wade laughed out loud. My younger brother grabbed Wade's leg and giggled more. I pulled Hermit and ran off with him. Wade let go of Mom and chased after me and Hermit. I lent Hermit to Wade, and he tickled his feet. My mom smiled and grabbed Hermit and gave him a raspberry while me and Wade hugged one more time. Then my mom stood up. "Hey, let's get ready to camp." My brother and I high-fived and ran to pack up. My mom jumped into the car. Mom said it would be an hour till we got there. I smiled and cuddled into my seat. I looked and saw my brother Wade pull out his phone. Then my brother Hermit was already passed out. I woke up, it was dark, and my mom looked to be caffeinating herself with a Starbucks latte. I stretched to signal to my mom I was awake. My mom got the signal. "Hey honey, how'd you sleep?" I smiled. "Pretty good," I responded. My mom grinned and showed me her latte. "Want a sip?" I grabbed the latte and sucked off the whipped cream and gave it back to her. She frowned and told me I needed to stop doing that. I smiled and laid my head on the window. Suddenly I heard a noise. "Look here." I shot up and looked out the window. The voice sounded like if an animal could talk, like a man. A large figure stood in the woods. I could only make out its large stature and large yellow eyes. My heart stopped. My mom looked at me in confusion. "Hey, are you okay?" I responded with a quick, "Yep, I'm fine." My mom looked at me and then turned to the window. Then with a sudden bolt, my brother woke up. "Whoa!" My mom almost had a heart attack. "What in the world, Wade?" Wade calmly breathed out, "Sorry, I had a bad dream." My mother frowned even more, but soon calmed down. As my brother started the fire, Hermit and I cooked the hot dogs. My mom sat in a camping chair and struggled to get service. The barrier of the forest surrounded us. Suddenly, Wade came in and sat down with us. "Hey, Boreal?" "Yeah?" I spoke. "Do you want to know how long I went for without a name?" "What?" I said, confused by what he meant. "When I was born, it took 2 years before Mom and Dad found me a name." Shocked, I kept listening. Then Mom got the idea to have an ocean theme in our name. "That's cool," I answered. "That's why Hermit's named Hermit?" Wade nodded. Then we both laid down with our hands behind our heads, content with what the day had brought. Then I remembered the being standing at the barrier of the woods. I then asked Wade a question. "Hey, Wade?" "Yeah," said Wade. "Right before you woke up in the car, I saw something." Wade responded, almost like he knew what I was talking about. "Strange, what did it look like?" "Well, it was tall. It had large yellow eyes and seemed to have leathery skin." My brother frowned. He sat up and looked at me with a fearful face. "That's why I woke up in the car. I had a dream just like that." I froze and almost ran into the car. Wade looked at me and then ran out of the tent. "So wait, why are we in the car?" said my mom, almost frustrated at the fact we told her to pack the stuff and get in the car. Hermit yelled out, "These hot dogs are good," he yelled. Wade grabbed a hot dog out of the bag and took a bite as I told Mom. "So the reason me and Wade have been so jumpy is because of that thing." My mom nodded her head and sighed. "Fine. We'll stay in here for 10 minutes, and if nothing spooky happens, then we are all going to go back out." Hermit cheered in agreement, and I laid my head on the window. As my mom snored, I, Hermit, and Wade sat waiting. "This is boring," yelled Hermit. "Can I watch a show on Mom's phone?" I sighed and slipped my hands under my mom's butt to get her phone. Suddenly a loud clicking noise erupted in the woods, then a whistle started. I stopped. Wade and Hermit stopped, and my mom woke up. "Stop whistling," she said. I responded, "Mom, we're not whistling." Wade bolted to the front of the car and turned off the lights. The car shut down and my mom quickly realized what was happening. She slipped under the wheel, and I bent down a bit. I breathed loudly and my heart was racing. Wade grabbed Hermit and they both laid down on the floor of the car. I pulled out my phone. I pressed the 2 side buttons and pressed the emergency button. SOS appeared on the screen and a woman answered the phone. 911, what's your emergency? I responded quickly. Help now. Our location is in the San Jacinto Mountains, and we are sheltered inside my mother's car. An entity we don't know is lurking in our campsite. The woman answered, "Okay, we are sending authorities. What does the man look like exactly?" "I can't explain. I have to hang up now. I'm sorry," I said. I hung up and buried my head into my hands. Then the whistling got louder. It seemed like it was inside the car. My mom grabbed my hand and gripped it tight. I looked above me and almost screamed. Through the sunroof I saw the entity, its large yellow eyes staring at me. Its mouth wasn't even moving along with the whistle. With a swift movement, I jumped into the front seat and slammed the reverse pedal. The creature was thrown off and my mom screamed. Wade and Hermit leaped up. Hermit, with tears streaming down his cheeks, let out a fearful wail. So yeah, that's my story. I know some might not believe me, and I don't even believe it myself. But I know one thing. Always be careful when camping. This happened to me a long time ago in an off-the-grid cabin in the deep woods of Montana. My name is Egbert Finchley, and back then I was enjoying a solo retreat to escape the everyday grind. I had met our nearest neighbor, Othniel Pickett, an older man who lived alone in a wooden house nearby. During our brief introduction, Othniel warned me to be careful at night in the woods, something that I shrugged off, as old tales to scare city folks like myself. The first few days passed relatively calm and uneventful. On my evening walks, I noticed a growing presence of footprints bigger than any animal I could identify, which stirred concern within me. On the 4th day, I stumbled upon a missing person poster nailed to a tree. The name read, Minerva Durampal, a woman who'd vanished 3 months prior while hiking these same woods. Despite feeling uneasy with this knowledge, I continued onward. Late that afternoon, just as twilight was settling in, I heard strange noises nearby, like branches snapping and deep guttural growls. Suddenly, frightened by an unseen menace lurking close by, my heart racing exceptionally fast, I knew instinctively that calling for help was futile. Reception was non-existent in these woods. That's when it appeared, an enormous creature unlike anything I had ever encountered before. It stood on 2 legs, towering over me with its muscular form covered in rust-colored fur. Its eyes gleamed ominously yellow in the darkening light. Sharp claws adorned its massive hands, indifferent yet sinister. Moments later, it emitted a fearsome bellow that shook the surrounding trees and sent shivers down my spine. Without thinking twice, I sprinted back toward my lonely cabin, as though my life depended on it, because it certainly did. Once inside and panting heavily from exertion mingled with terror, I scrambled to bolt the door securely shut. Overwhelmed, I dwelled upon Othniel's warning about the woods. Maybe he had encountered this same creature in the past, but was too fearful to say any more. Still processing my situation, I allowed myself no time to wonder how many individual losses had occurred. People like Minerva Dalrymple never expecting that they would end their day as prey. Night followed night in this unnerving locale, and slowly, the tension escalated further. The beast made its presence known through stealthy approaches to my cabin, sometimes scratches at the door, other instances growls, low yet menacing, from just beyond the doorframe. At one point, pressed by necessity and fueled by an innate stubbornness, I made a futile decision. I reached out to Othniel for help or advice, via a handwritten letter sealed with hurried handwriting, and left within proximity to his house. However, even that desperation never yielded any result or response. Gradually, desperation took hold within my frenzied thoughts. Is this thing following me? Hunting me? Can anyone or anything even help change these dire circumstances? In truth, knowing that time was quickly running out spurred my problem-solving capabilities into overdrive. One evening, while mentally preparing my wrestling strategy with the creature, if it came to that, I noticed a loaded hunting rifle resting upon a wall mount in Othniel's home as I scanned through his window. Stolen glances over our interactions informed me that this very rifle could well be the deciding factor between survival or death, as shadows lengthened and night unwittingly enveloped us. A chilling wind stirred outside while dark clouds swirled overhead. Invisibility seemed increasingly pressing as each second passed us inexorably toward some terrible confrontation amidst cold shiver-shadow trees. We stood braced against either side of fate, prey, or predator. My mind raced as I considered the weapon in Othniel's home. If I were to take it, that would mean trespassing and theft. Regardless of the risks and consequences, my sanity and survival were at stake. Mustering my courage, I ventured into Othniel's property and quickly retrieved the rifle from his wall mount. "Sorry, Othniel," I whispered to myself as I retreated back to my cabin. Outside, I could hear the familiar growls lurking within the dark woods. The next day, I attempted to share news of my encounters with a neighbor. Their eyes grew wide at my account of the creature, but they dismissed my claims as mere paranoia brought on by isolation in the woods. They suggested that I take a trip to visit family or friends in the city, a futile solution to escape whatever beast seemed so intent on tormenting me, bringing with it the all-too-familiar dread that weighed heavily upon me. Clutching the rifle tightly in my hands, I fortified my nerves and resolved to confront this terrifying foe. Though I had no plan in place, my instinct screamed at me that unless I faced this creature head-on, it would continue haunting me. As night set in completely, I stepped out of my cabin cautiously but determinedly. With each step taken deeper into the dense forest around me, ominous growls grew louder, indicating that my pursuit was being reciprocated by what waited for me among those shadowed trees. The once distant growling grew closer, until it was upon me suddenly. A monstrous figure emerged before me from the dark veil of trees. It appeared part human, yet grotesquely distorted, elongated limbs extending from its towering, which was covered in a patchwork fusion of human flesh and matted fur. It snarled at me, displaying sharp teeth like daggers which glistened menacingly in the moonlight. With a surge of adrenaline, I raised a pilfered rifle and aimed it at the creature. Even during this standoff, it continued to emit guttural growls, each more menacing than the last. I fired a single shot, hitting this foul beast squarely in its chest. It roared in agony and glared at me with a burning hatred that sent shivers down my spine. To my shock and disbelief, it did not perish from my firearm's impact as I had prayed. Quite the opposite happened. The gunshot seemed to only intensify its resolve to eliminate me as it charged with renewed ferocity. I turned on my heel and sprinted back to the safety of my cabin, driven by the sounds of impending doom closing in behind me. I barged through my cabin door mere seconds before the creature crashed against it, attempting to gain entry. I locked all doors and windows and sat in absolute silence, fearing that any noise would reveal my hiding spot. There was no dial tone on the landline, presumably cut off by the beast. Morning arrived after an agonizing night spent in a tense state of heightened alertness. The creature seemed to have disappeared just as quickly as it materialized, leaving me physically unscathed, but forever shaken by its relentless pursuit. What had once been my sanctuary in nature was irrevocably tainted by terror. In these following days, as I left those woods far behind me and took up residence elsewhere among more populated areas, I found myself still paranoid that those haunting howls would find me once more, carried along on chilling wind currents straight into my dreams. Against all odds, I survived a horrifying confrontation with an unknown creature that defied logic or reason. Its nature may forever remain a mystery to me, perhaps some type of skinwalker or shapeshifter lurking within societal shadows. My only solace is the knowledge that I faced my fears head-on and lived to tell this tale of those harrowing days in the shadowed woods. And as I remember Othniel's unfired hunting rifle that stayed mounted on his wall, I realize how thankful I am that I took matters into my own hands when all hope seemed lost. May those dark events forever be locked away in the recesses of my mind, never more to reappear as more than just a chilling memory. This happened to me a few years ago. I didn't like to leave my house. Now I'm more open to hiking or spending time in nature. If you ask, I'll talk about it. My name is Killian. Before all this happened, I always loved the peace of the forest. On weekends, I left behind the busy city for the solitude of the woods near my home. Just south of Asheville, a sprawling network of trails weaves through the North Carolina mountains. One crisp fall morning, I set off alone. The early sun barely poked through the heavy canopy of leaves. My hiking boots crunched over fallen twigs. I breathed deeply, savoring the scent of the damp earth beneath my feet. Every so often, I paused to watch the play of sunlight through the branches overhead. The woods were my sanctuary, or so I thought. I came to a familiar clearing. A single massive oak dominated the space, its gnarled roots poking through the earth like fingers grasping at the sky. I always took a moment here before continuing on the trail. Something was different. Silence. It wasn't the comforting silence of the forest, but a thick, oppressive hush. The birds had fallen quiet. Even the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind had ceased. I felt uneasy, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. Then I heard it. A low growl echoing from the trees beyond the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest. I froze. My mind raced, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. A bear. I'd seen them around here before, but never this close to the main trails. Another growl, louder this time. It didn't sound quite like a bear. Deeper, more guttural. It was definitely close now. I whirled, scanning the dense underbrush. My hands shook as I fumbled for my pocket knife, the small blade utterly useless against whatever creature lurked in the shadows. It stepped into the sunlight from behind a thick stand of pines. I'd never seen anything like it. Taller than a man by far, it moved on two legs. Long, powerful arms hung at its sides, ending in huge clawed hands. It was covered in thick, matted fur, dark gray-brown. Its eyes burned into me from the depths of a long muzzle filled with sharp yellow teeth. The creature was all muscle. There was no doubt it was a predator. I had heard the stories, of course. Tales of upright wolf-like creatures lurking in the deepest woods went around these parts. I dismissed them as tall tales, stories to spook kids around the campfire. But now I knew those tales were rooted in something far more terrifying. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I was rooted to the spot, fear keeping me paralyzed. The creature took a tentative step towards me, its head cocked to one side as it studied me. I saw intelligence in those eyes, a cold calculation that made my blood run cold. It lunged. I barely had time to react before its sharp claws were raking down my chest, tearing into the fabric of my jacket. Pain erupted in my torso, and I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The creature howled in frustration, its eyes burning with bloodlust. My fear dissolved into desperate resolve. I couldn't stay here. I had to run. Blindly, I turned and bolted for the trees. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the woods, branches whipping at my face, my ragged breath burning in my lungs. Every sound of snapping twigs or rustling leaves made me jump in terror, certain at any moment the creature would be upon me. I ran until my legs could carry me no longer. I collapsed behind a fallen log, panting and shaking. For a long while I didn't move. All I could do was listen intently, my entire body poised for flight. Slowly I realized the sounds of the forest had returned. The wind rustled through the trees. Birds sang their songs once more. Still, I waited, and waited. I rose cautiously, my body aching with scrapes and bruises. I crept back towards the clearing where my ordeal had begun. My hiking pack was strewn about, its contents scattered across the forest floor. The creature was nowhere in sight. Relief and fear warred within me. I knew I was lucky. I'd escaped with nothing more than some scratches and a story that nobody would likely believe. I never saw the creature again. I still hike those trails, but I do so with a wary eye and a faster pace. It's hard to fully return to that feeling of tranquility in the woods. The knowledge that something lurks there always lingers around the edges of my mind. This happened to me in 1977. My old man used to say, "Son, a good pair of boots and a sturdy backpack are all you need to find the heart of America." He was a romanticist, my old man. Never saw a national park he didn't want to disappear into for weeks on end. I guess some of that rubbed off on me. I was working as a lumberjack in Oregon at the time, a job about as romantic as a rusty chainsaw. I needed a break from the monotony of felling trees, the endless whine of machinery, and the smell of sawdust that clung to my skin like a second layer. So I did what any self-respecting outdoorsman would do, packed my trusty backpack, laced up my boots, and hit the road. A place my old man always spoke of with reverence. A place he said held secrets older than time itself. The drive was long and uneventful, a blur of highways and rest stops. I reached the park's entrance just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the scent of pine, a welcome change from the diesel fumes I'd been inhaling for the past few days. I set up camp in a secluded clearing, the only sound the crackling of my campfire and the distant hoot of an owl. The night was cool and crisp, the stars a brilliant tapestry above. I slept soundly, the exhaustion of the journey lulling me into a deep slumber. The next morning I woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee brewing on my camp stove. I ate a hearty breakfast of eggs and bacon, then set off on a hike, eager to explore the park's famed trails. The path wound through a dense forest, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Hours passed, the trail becoming steeper, the air thinner. I reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley, a patchwork of green and gold stretching as far as the eye could see. I was mesmerized by the view, the sheer beauty of it taking my breath away. As I stood there lost in the moment, I heard a noise behind me, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves. I turned, my heart pounding, but saw nothing. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. I continued on, the trail descending into the valley. The forest grew darker, the trees taller and more imposing. I started to feel uneasy, a sense of unease creeping over me. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the bottom of the valley. Suddenly I heard the noise again. This time it was closer, more distinct. I stopped, my senses on high alert. I heard a low growl, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I turned, my blood running cold. There in the shadows stood a figure, tall and gaunt, with long, greasy hair and a beard that reached his chest. He wore tattered clothes, his skin was dirty and scarred, his eyes dark and piercing, fixed on me with a predatory gaze. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. I could see his teeth, yellow and jagged as he bared them in a snarl. "You're trespassing," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "This is our land. We don't take kindly to strangers." I tried to speak, but my words caught in my throat. The figure lunged, his hands reaching for me. I dodged, stumbling backwards. He lunged again, this time grabbing my arm. I cried out in pain, his grip like a vice. I struggled to free myself, but he was too strong. He dragged me deeper into the forest, his laughter echoing through the trees. I was taken to a clearing where a group of figures sat around a campfire. They were all as gaunt and unkempt as the first, their eyes gleaming with malice. They stared at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and hunger. The first figure threw me to the ground, my body hitting the hard earth with a thud. He stood over me, his eyes raking over me like a butcher inspecting a slab of meat. "You'll make a fine feast." The others gathered around, their laughter growing louder. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. I heard the sound of a knife being drawn, the sharp scrape of metal against leather. I felt the hand grab my hair, yanking my head back. Then everything went black. When I woke, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body aching and bruised. A nurse stood beside me, her face a mask of concern. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "You were found unconscious in the woods, badly beaten and dehydrated. A group of hikers stumbled upon you and called for help." I told her what happened, but she didn't believe me. She said I must have hit my head and imagined the whole thing. I knew she was wrong. I knew what I saw, and I knew I would never forget the terror of that night. Years later, I read a news article about a group of missing hikers in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They were never found. I couldn't help but wonder if they had met the same fate as I almost did. I never went back to the park, but I never forgot the secrets it held. Secrets older than time itself. Secrets that would haunt me for the rest of my days. In the end, they were never caught. They say they're still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Great Smoky Mountains. A group of feral men, driven mad by isolation and hunger. They say they're the descendants of a long-lost tribe, the remnants of a forgotten civilization. They say they're the guardians of the mountains, the keepers of its ancient secrets. But I know the truth. They're not guardians, they're predators, and they're still out there waiting for their next victim. This happened to me on February 7th, 1988. I still remember it like it was yesterday. You won't believe me. Even I have my doubts sometimes, but I know what I saw. My name is Deputy Sheriff Garrett Lyle, and I worked for the Sheriff's Department in Jasper County, Texas. Not much goes on around there, that's for sure. Jasper isn't the kind of place where you find trouble. Trouble finds you. It was a warm evening, that much I remember. I was on the late patrol driving an old beat-up Crown Victoria. I made the usual turn onto Farm to Market Road 252, heading toward the Angelina National Forest on the lookout for anything out of the ordinary. The occasional deer, a drunk driver, that was about the extent of it. I'd been feeling antsy the entire shift. It was like a sixth sense, you know? A premonition. The woods always felt eerie at night. I'd heard local rumors about strange lights, odd noises, the kind of stuff folks love to spin yarns about. Usually I chalked it up to superstitious nonsense. This time was different. At around 11 p.m., I got a garbled dispatch call. It was Bertha, our sweet old dispatcher. She could barely choke the words out. Something about a disturbance up on County Road 777. A sighting, but she couldn't get any specifics. All she said was, "Deputy Lyle, you've got to get out there right now." The minute she mentioned CR 777, my heart started pounding. That road is a long, lonely stretch heading straight into the heart of Davy Crockett National Forest. People rarely take that route, especially not this late in the evening. This was bad. I could feel it. I flipped on the siren and floored it through those winding dirt roads, praying no critters darted out. After what felt like hours, I saw flickering lights ahead. As I got closer, I realized there was an old pickup truck pulled over to the side of the road. Hazard lights were on, and the driver's door stood wide open. My blood ran cold. This was the disturbance. I put the car in park and hopped out, my flashlight in one hand and my pistol in the other. I could see the interior of the truck was empty. There were a couple of crushed beer cans, fishing gear, nothing too strange. I slowly circled the truck, my nerves on edge, and that's when I saw it. There were enormous bloody gashes in the side panels, like something gigantic had ripped into the metal. Huge claw marks, that's what it looked like. Then I found them, footprints. They weren't human, no way. They were massive, at least 2 feet long, and they led off into the thicket. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Suddenly I heard a crash, then a low guttural growl. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I cautiously edged toward the tree line and flicked on my flashlight. At first, all I saw was dense underbrush. Then I spotted a pair of eyes like huge embers glowing in the darkness. I'd never seen anything like it. They just stared at me, unblinking. The creature, whatever it was, started lumbering towards me. It was at least 7 feet tall, massive and powerful. Its shoulders were broad, covered in thick dark fur. It walked on 2 legs, but its arms were longer than a human's and dragged near the ground. I caught a glimpse of its face, snarling, with razor-sharp teeth. The whole scene was like something out of a nightmare. I was paralyzed with fear for just a moment. Then I remembered my training and snapped out of it. I fumbled for my radio, my hand shaking. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Lyle. I need urgent backup on CR 777, unknown subject." But before I could finish, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. Another one. There were two of these creatures, closing in from all sides. I didn't hesitate. I fired 3 warning shots into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, followed by an eerie silence. I called out to them, "Sheriff's Department, put your hands up and come out slowly." No response. I inched backward, trying to keep both creatures in my sights. Adrenaline coursed through my veins. I was outnumbered and outmatched. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hand. I knew if I didn't take charge of the situation, things could get real ugly, real quick. I raised my pistol, aiming it at the creature closest to me. I said, "Put your hands up, freeze," I yelled, my voice sounding braver than I felt. The creature hesitated, a guttural snarl rumbling deep in its throat. Then it lunged straight at me. I fired a shot. The bullet struck it in the shoulder, making it stagger, but it kept coming, seemingly unfazed. Panic surged through me. I realized there was no stopping this thing. I squeezed off another shot, desperate to protect myself. In between the flashes from my gun, I could see its massive form hurtling through the darkness, its eyes blazing with fury. I turned and sprinted toward the patrol car. I fumbled for the keys, my fingers trembling like leaves in a windstorm. I heard thundering footsteps close behind me, a hot, foul breath on the back of my neck. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and hit the gas. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the road, the tires spitting out gravel and dust. My rearview mirror was filled with darkness, but I knew it was still out there, somewhere in the night. I drove like a bat out of hell, back to the sheriff's station. Every bump jolted me, making me glance over my shoulder as if those glowing eyes were still pursuing me. Upon reaching the station, I burst through the doors, my face white as a sheet. I stammered out my report to Lieutenant Carter, who looked like I'd grown a second head. He called in every available unit and a couple of officers from neighboring counties. We armed ourselves to the teeth and headed back to that stretch of road. We combed the forest for hours, but there was no sign of the creatures. We did find the carcass of a deer ripped to shreds, like something had taken a giant can opener to it. The other deputies threw me strange looks. I knew they thought I had lost my mind. But I swear on my mother's grave, I saw those creatures, clearer than day. Word about the incident spread through the town like wildfire. Some folks called me crazy. Others thought it might have been a bear attack. But I knew deep down the truth. There's something out there in the woods, something far more dangerous than we realize. The sheriff hushed the whole thing up, said it was a wild animal attack to avoid sparking panic. To this day, he claims I had a breakdown, suffered some kind of hallucination out there. But I know what I saw, and it haunts me every single night. The next day, a family went missing on a camping trip near CR 777. They were never found. Some swear those creatures got them. Others dismissed it as a tragic accident. Maybe they wandered off the trails, got lost, and succumbed to the elements. But a chill runs down my spine whenever I think about what might have really happened. Sometimes late at night, I still think I see glimpses of those fiery eyes lurking in the shadows. It makes me question everything about the natural world. There are things out there that defy explanation, things that science and reason can't touch. And for the sake of everyone in that sleepy little town, I hope those things stay hidden. I was headed to Jefferson National Forest for a weekend getaway. I needed the break, honestly. Work had been hectic, and my girlfriend Lisa thought some time in nature might clear my head. So I packed up my RV and set off on what I thought would be a peaceful retreat. The first night, I parked the RV in a secluded spot by a small lake. It was perfect. No other campers around. Just me and the sounds of the forest. I set up a small fire, cooked some beans and sausage, and cracked open a beer. The night was cool, the fire warm, and the stars brighter than I'd seen in a long time. I remember joking to myself about how cliché it was to be out here, thinking about life and all that, but it felt good. After dinner, I decided to take a short walk before turning in. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods. I was about 10 minutes in when I noticed something odd. The usual forest sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, had stopped. It was dead silent. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But then, a few minutes later, I found something strange. It was a small campsite, but it looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. There was a tent, half collapsed, with a sleeping bag spilling out of the entrance. Clothes were scattered around, and a backpack lay open, contents strewn across the ground. I called out, but no one answered. The whole scene gave me the creeps, so I decided to head back to my RV. As I turned to leave, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind the tent. I froze, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The rustling grew louder, and I backed away slowly. I didn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I hurried back to the RV and locked the door behind me. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or a deer, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to sleep, but every little noise outside had me on edge. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. The next day, I decided to stick closer to the RV. I spent the morning fishing at the lake and caught a couple of decent-sized trout. By noon, I was feeling more relaxed. The sun was shining, and the creepy campsite from the night before seemed like a distant memory. That afternoon, a couple of hikers passed by. They introduced themselves as Tom and Jake, said they were out exploring the trails for the weekend. We chatted for a bit, and I mentioned the abandoned campsite I'd found. They looked at each other, then back at me. "That's weird," Tom said. "We haven't seen anyone else out here." Jake nodded. "Maybe they left in a hurry or something. Could be anything." I agreed, but something in their expressions told me they were just as unsettled as I was. They moved on after a while, and I went back to my fishing. As evening fell, I started to feel that same unease from the night before. I decided to keep the fire going a bit longer tonight, just in case. I was sitting by the fire reading a book when I heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. I called out, thinking maybe it was Tom and Jake coming back. But no one answered. I stood up, the fire casting long shadows around me, and shone my flashlight into the darkness. I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, but it was too quick to make out. I shouted, my voice sounding braver than I felt. Still, no answer. The footsteps stopped, and everything went silent again. I backed up to the RV, keeping the flashlight trained on the trees. I thought about grabbing the tire iron from the storage compartment, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the woods. Just as I was about to retreat inside, the footsteps started again, this time faster. I didn't wait. I jumped into the RV and locked the door, my heart pounding. I grabbed the tire iron and stood by the door, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside, and then there was a loud bang, like something heavy had hit the side of the RV. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the tire iron, but eventually the noises stopped. I spent the rest of the night sitting at the small table, staring at the door, tire iron in hand. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up with the first light of dawn streaming through the windows. The rest of the weekend was tense. I didn't stray far from the RV, always keeping one eye on the trees. I didn't see Tom and Jake again, and by the time Sunday rolled around, I was ready to get the hell out of there. On my way out, I decided to take a different route, hoping to avoid whatever had been stalking me. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't until I hit the main road that I finally started to relax. Back home, I told Lisa about the trip, but I left out the creepy parts. No point in worrying her, but the whole thing kept nagging at me. I did some research and found out that there had been a few disappearances in that area over the years, mostly hikers who wandered off and were never seen again. I couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps and the abandoned campsite. What had happened out there? Who or what had been watching me? I didn't have any answers, just a lingering sense of dread. A few weeks later, I got a call from the local sheriff. They'd found Tom and Jake's bodies not far from where I'd camped. They'd been mauled, but not by any animal the sheriff could identify. He asked if I had seen anything unusual, and I told him about the footsteps and the banging on the RV. He took notes, but I could tell he didn't really believe me. I'd been camping plenty of times since then, but I never went back to Jefferson National Forest. There's something out there, something that doesn't want to be found, and if you're smart, you'll stay far away from it. A few months later, I got an email from a guy named Dave. He said he'd heard about my experience from the sheriff and wanted to meet. He claimed to be an expert on strange disappearances and thought he could help me figure out what happened. I was skeptical, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him. Dave turned out to be a retired detective who'd spent years investigating missing person cases. He'd come across patterns that didn't make sense, clusters of disappearances in remote areas. He showed me maps and reports, and it was clear he knew his stuff. He called the creature, describing a malevolent forest spirit that lured people away. We talked for hours, and by the end I wasn't sure what to believe. Part of me wanted to write it all off as superstition, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that there was something to his theories. I haven't seen Dave since that meeting, but his words stuck with me. I still go camping, but I'm more cautious now. I stick to well-traveled areas and always let someone know where I'm going. And every once in a while, when I'm out in the woods, I still hear those footsteps in my mind, slow and deliberate, reminding me that some mysteries are better left unsolved. As for Nix, I suppose it's just a name, a way to make sense of the unknown. But whatever it is, it's out there, lurking in the shadows of the Jefferson National Forest, waiting for its next victim. My name is Ethan Eagleclaw, 28 years old, and this happened to me on October 5th, 2008. Back then, I was fresh out of a messy divorce, seeking solace in a secluded cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a place untouched by the modern world, with no cell service, no internet, just me, my thoughts, and the vast wilderness. I had hoped for peace and quiet, but what I found was far more sinister. One crisp autumn day, I decided to venture out for a hike, equipped with my grandfather's old compass and a worn-out map of the area. The air was still, and the leaves were ablaze with color, the beauty a stark contrast to the chilling events that were about to unfold. As I delved deeper into the woods, the sunlight began to wane, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted around me. The map led me to an overgrown path, barely discernible beneath the fallen foliage. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease creeping up my spine. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed on. The path wound through dense thickets and over moss-covered rocks, leading me to a clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood. Its windows were boarded up, its roof sagged, and a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Peering through a crack in one of the boards, I saw a scene that made my blood run cold. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by a flickering lantern, revealing a figure hunched over a table. It was human in shape, but its movements were jerky and unnatural. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes were sunken and hollow, its mouth a gaping moth filled with jagged teeth. I watched in horror as the figure reached out and grabbed a jar, its long, bony fingers curling around the glass. It raised the jar to its lips and tilted its head back, the contents spilling down its throat. I couldn't see what was in the jar, but the figure's reaction was enough to tell me it was something vile. I stumbled backward, the sound of snapping twigs alerting the figure to my presence. It turned its head, its eyes locking onto mine. A shiver ran down my spine, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps a grotesque symphony of snaps and crunches. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to put as much distance between us as possible. I burst out of the clearing and onto the main trail, my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached my cabin, where I slammed the door shut and bolted it. I leaned against the wood, panting, my body trembling. I spent the rest of the day holed up in my cabin, the image of the figure seared into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something evil, something that should have remained hidden. As darkness fell, I heard a scratching sound at my door. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. I grabbed my rifle, my hands shaking as I loaded it. The scratching turned into a pounding, the door rattling in its frame. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I glanced around the cabin, searching for a way out. My eyes fell on the back window, the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I threw open the window and climbed out, dropping to the ground below. I ran towards the woods, the pounding behind me growing fainter. I didn't look back. My only thought was to escape the horrors that lurked in that cabin. I ran until I collapsed, my body exhausted. I lay there for a while, catching my breath, my mind racing. What was that creature? Why was it in that abandoned cabin? And what was it doing with that jar? I didn't have answers, only questions. But one thing was certain. I couldn't stay in that cabin any longer. I had to get out of those woods, away from the evil that resided there. As I got to my feet, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around, my heart in my throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, its pale skin illuminated by the moonlight. It was the creature from the cabin. It was closer now. I could see the details of its face. Its eyes were black pits, devoid of any emotion. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It raised its hand, its long, bony fingers reaching out for me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root. I fell to the ground, the creature looming over me. It reached out and grabbed my ankle, its grip like iron. I screamed, kicking and struggling, but it was no use. It dragged me towards the woods, my body scraping against the rough ground. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. I scrambled through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes, the creature's hot breath a constant reminder of my impending doom. I could hear it crashing through the trees, its snarls growing louder. I pushed myself harder, fueled by a primal instinct for survival. I stumbled onto a dirt road, the headlights of an approaching vehicle momentarily blinding me. I threw myself in front of the car, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, a bearded man jumping out. He surveyed the scene, his eyes widening as he saw the creature emerging from the woods. Without hesitation, the man grabbed me and pulled me into his truck. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and gunned the engine. I looked back to see the creature standing in the middle of the road, its head tilted, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Then, with a terrifying shriek, it vanished into the woods. The man who introduced himself as Boone Cade, a local park ranger, took me to the nearest town. I recounted my ordeal, my voice trembling with shock and exhaustion. Boone listened intently, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "I've heard rumors about strange goings-on in those woods," he said, "but I never thought they were anything more than campfire stories." I showed Boone the cuts and bruises on my arms and legs, evidence of my encounter. He examined them, his brow furrowed. "This is an animal," he said. "It's something else." Boone took me to the local hospital where I was treated for my injuries. The doctors were baffled by the nature of my wounds, unable to explain the deep puncture marks and strange chemical burns. Word of my encounter spread through the town, drawing a mix of skepticism and morbid curiosity. The following morning, Boone returned to my hospital room, a newspaper clutched in his hand. The headline read, "Hiker found dead in Appalachian woods, cause of death unknown." "It's not just you," Boone said, his voice grim. "There have been other disappearances, other strange deaths. People have been whispering about a creature they call the Skinwalker, a malevolent entity that roams the woods." I was discharged from the hospital a few days later, my body battered, but my spirit unbroken. I returned to my city life, leaving the cabin and its horrors behind. But I couldn't escape the memory of that night, the terror that had gripped me as the Skinwalker pursued me through the woods, and I tried to move on. I threw myself into my work trying to bury the past, but the nightmares persisted, the chilling shriek of the Skinwalker echoing in my dreams. I sought therapy, hoping to find some peace, but the fear remained. I became obsessed with the Skinwalker, researching Native American folklore, consulting with experts on the paranormal. I learned that the Skinwalker was not just a creature of legend, but a very real and dangerous entity. It was said to be a shadeshifter, capable of taking on the form of any animal or human. It was a predator, drawn to the darkness in people's hearts, feeding on their fear and despair. I realized that my encounter with the Skinwalker was not just a random act of violence. It was a warning, a sign that I had strayed too far from the light. I'd allowed the darkness to consume me, to twist my soul, and the Skinwalker had come to claim me, but I had escaped its clutches thanks to Boone's intervention. I owed him my life, and I knew I couldn't let the Skinwalker continue its reign of terror. I had to do something to protect others from the same fate. I returned to the Appalachians, armed with knowledge and a newfound sense of purpose. I sought out Boone, who was now retired from the Park Service. Together we formed an unlikely alliance, determined to expose the truth about the Skinwalker and bring an end to its reign of terror. We spent months gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the puzzle. We learned that the Skinwalker had been active in the area for decades, its existence shrouded in secrecy and fear. We also discovered that it was not alone. There were others like it, a network of malevolent entities that preyed on the vulnerable. Our investigation led us to a remote cave deep in the woods, where we found a shrine to the Skinwalker. It was a grotesque display of bones, animal skulls, and other macabre objects. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized the extent of the evil we were dealing with. As we emerged from the cave, we heard a rustling in the underbrush. We froze, our eyes scanning the darkness. A figure stepped out of the shadows, its silhouette familiar yet distorted. It was the Skinwalker, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. It raised its arms, its claws extended, its jaws open wide. Boone and I raised our rifles, ready to defend ourselves. But before we could fire, the Skinwalker vanished, leaving us alone in the darkness. We stood there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. Then Boone turned to me, his face grim. We made our way back to Boone's truck, our senses on high alert. We didn't speak, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon us. As we drove away, I glanced back at the woods, a shiver running down my spine. I knew the Skinwalker was still out there, watching us, waiting for its next opportunity. We returned to Boone's home, a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town. He poured us both a stiff drink, his hand trembling slightly. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. "What do we do now?" I asked finally. Boone took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes gazing into the distance. "We tell the truth," he said. "We tell the world what we've seen, what we know. We can't let the Skinwalker continue to terrorize this community." The next day, we went to the local newspaper, the Herald Tribune. We told our story to the editor, a skeptical but intrigued man named Edgar Tull. He listened intently. His eyes narrowed as we recounted our experiences, the missing hiker, the strange deaths, the rumors that have been circulating for years. It all adds up. Toad decided to publish our story despite the potential backlash. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. The story ran on the front page, accompanied by photographs of the Skinwalker's shrine and the hiker's remains. The reaction was swift and intense. Some people dismissed the story as a hoax, while others were terrified, their worst fears confirmed. But there were also those who believed us, who had seen the Skinwalker themselves or knew someone who had. They came forward with their own stories, adding to the growing body of evidence. The town was divided, but one thing was clear. The Skinwalker could no longer operate in secrecy. Its existence had been exposed, and the community was on edge. The police launched an investigation, but they found no concrete evidence to support our claims. Boone and I continued our research, determined to find a way to stop the Skinwalker. We consulted with Native American elders, who told us that the creature was a manifestation of evil, a corrupted shaman who had abused his power. They warned us that the Skinwalker was nearly impossible to kill, but they also offered us a glimmer of hope. They told us about a ritual, a way to banish the Skinwalker from our world. It was a dangerous undertaking, but it was our only chance. With their guidance, we prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary herbs, stones, and other sacred objects. On the night of the full moon, we returned to the Skinwalker's cave, armed with our knowledge and our faith. We performed the ritual, chanting the ancient words, our voices echoing through the darkness. As we reached the climax of the ritual, the cave began to shake, the ground trembling beneath our feet. A blinding light filled the chamber, and a deafening roar echoed through the woods. Then silence. We emerged from the cave. Our bodies weak, but our spirits lifted. We had done it. We had banished the skinwalker, at least for now. We knew it could return, but we also knew that we were prepared. We had faced our fears, and we had emerged victorious. In the aftermath of the ritual, the disappearances and strange deaths ceased. The town slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the skinwalker lingered. The creature's name became synonymous with fear and evil, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. Boone and I continued to monitor the woods, always vigilant, always ready. We knew that the skinwalker could return at any time, but we also knew that we would be there to stop it. We had become the protectors of our community, the guardians against the evil that lurks in the darkness. My name is Marcos Antonio Flores, and I am 29 years old, and this happened to me back in 2010. I was living in a small town in New Mexico, a place called Chicarilla. It's off the beaten path, not a place you'd stumble upon unless you were looking for it. I'd been working as a mechanic at the local auto shop and had just started dating a girl named Ilara. She worked at the diner, and her laugh was infectious. Ilara and I decided to take a drive. She suggested we head up to an old abandoned campground about 20 miles out of town. I'd heard stories about the place, how it used to be a popular spot before some mysterious disappearances shut it down, but those were just stories, and we needed a break from the usual routine. We drove up in my old pickup, the sun setting behind us. The road was narrow and winding, bordered by dense forest. The campground itself was a collection of decaying cabins and overgrown trails, nature reclaiming what man had left behind. We parked the truck near what used to be the main lodge and got out. Ilara grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, and I took my old hunting knife, just in case. We wandered around talking about nothing in particular. The air was cool and the forest was eerily quiet. Ilara joked about ghost stories, trying to spook me, but I played it cool. After a while, we found a spot near a fire pit and sat down. The remains of an old stone circle were still there, and it seemed like a good place to rest for a bit. "Ever wonder what really happened here?" Ilara asked, poking at the ashes with a stick. "Yeah, maybe," I replied. "But it's probably just some old legend to keep kids from coming up here." Just then, we heard a rustling noise from the trees behind us. I turned, squinting into the darkness. The flashlight beam cut through the shadows, but there was nothing there. Probably just an animal, I thought. "Did you hear that?" Ilara whispered, her voice a bit shaky. "Yeah, it's probably nothing. Let's head back to the truck." We started making our way back when we heard it again, louder this time. A low, almost human-like moan echoed through the trees. I felt a chill, but I didn't want to seem scared in front of Ilara. We quickened our pace, the flashlight bobbing in her hand. As we neared the truck, we saw movement in the trees. A tall, gangly figure stepped into the dim light. It was humanoid, but there was something off about it. Its limbs were too long, and its eyes, God, those eyes, glowed faintly in the dark. I fumbled for the keys as I kept my eyes on the figure. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it was sizing us up. I finally got the door open and pushed Ilara inside. I scrambled around to the driver's side, jumped in, and started the engine. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the creature. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, like something that had been dead a long time. It had no nose, just two dark pits where its nostrils should be. I floored the gas pedal, and the truck lurched forward. The creature didn't move out of the way. It just watched us drive off, its head turning to follow us as we sped down the dirt road. "Jesus, what the hell was that?" Ilara panted, gripping the edge of her seat. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We drove in silence the rest of the way, both of us trying to process what we had seen. When we finally got back to town, we parked outside the diner and sat there for a while, neither of us wanting to get out of the truck. "You think anyone will believe us?" Ilara asked, breaking the silence. "No," I said, shaking my head, "but we know what we saw." We didn't talk much after that night. Something had changed between us, an unspoken understanding that we had seen something we shouldn't have. I tried to put it out of my mind and went back to work, but the image of that creature haunted me. A week later, I heard that someone had gone missing up near the old campground. A hiker, they said. The search parties found nothing, and after a while, people just stopped looking. Life went on, but there was always that lingering sense of unease. One evening, Alara called me. Her voice was trembling. She said she'd seen the creature again, this time near her house. She was scared, and I could hear it in her voice. I told her to stay put and I'd be right over. I grabbed my hunting rifle from the closet, loaded it, and drove over to her place. She lived on the outskirts of town near the forest. When I arrived, she was standing on the porch, flashlight in hand. "It's out there, Toby." "I saw it," she said, pointing towards the tree line. We stood there for a moment, listening. The night was still, too still. Then we heard it, the same low moan we'd heard at the campground. It sent a shiver through me, but I steeled myself. "Stay behind me," I told Alara as we moved towards the trees. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows. I held the rifle ready, every sense on high alert. Then we saw it. The creature was standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. It didn't move, just stared with those hollow eyes. I raised the rifle, aiming at its chest. My hands were shaking, but I steadied myself and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest. The creature staggered back, but didn't fall. It let out a horrible, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. Grabbing Alara's hand and pulling her back towards the house, we stumbled inside and locked the door behind us. I reloaded the rifle, keeping my eyes on the windows. We could hear the creature outside, moving around, but it didn't try to break in. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get help." We waited for what felt like hours, listening to the sounds outside. Eventually it grew quiet. I cautiously opened the door and peered out. The creature was gone. We got in my truck and drove to the sheriff's office. I told Sheriff Garcia everything about the creature, the campground, the missing hiker. He listened, but I could tell he was skeptical. "All right, Tobias," he said, scratching his head. "I'll send a couple of deputies to check it out, but you two should get some rest." We went back to Alara's place, but neither of us could sleep. The next morning the sheriff called. They had found something at the campground. "Remains," he said. "Human remains. The hiker, or what was left of him." Sheriff Garcia organized a search party. They scoured the forest but found no trace of the creature. It was as if it had vanished. People in town started talking, whispering about the old legends, about the Wendigo. It was just a name, a word to describe something they didn't understand. But I knew what we had seen was real. Elora and I decided to leave Jicarilla. We couldn't stay, not after what had happened. We packed our things and moved to a small town in Colorado, trying to start fresh. But the memories stayed with us, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced. Years passed and life went on. Elora and I got married, had a couple of kids. We never talked about that night, but sometimes when the wind howled through the trees, I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that still haunted me. One day I got a call from Sheriff Garcia. He told me that more people had gone missing near the old campground. Hikers, campers, even a couple of locals. The disappearances had started again, and he wanted to know if I had seen anything, if I remembered anything that could help. "I don't know, Sheriff," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of the past. "Just be careful out there." I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring out the window. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside. I knew that no matter how far we ran, we couldn't escape the past. The creature was still out there somewhere waiting, and I knew that one day I'd have to face it again. But until that day came, I held on to the present, to the life we had built. Because in the end, it was all we had, and sometimes that was enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the creature, about the lives it had taken. I wondered if anyone would ever find a way to stop it, to end the terror. But deep down I knew the truth. Some things were beyond our understanding, beyond our control. And maybe, just maybe, some monsters were meant to remain in the shadows, lurking at the edge of our reality, reminding us of the darkness that lies within us all. The rain fell steadily, the kind that soaks you to the bone even through a thick canvas coat. It was the sort of rain I'd learned to expect in late November in the Adirondacks. 1987 was a harsh year, harsher than most, but that's a story for another drink. I was hauling timber out of the North Woods, a back-breaking job that paid a man just enough to keep his belly full and his whiskey glass topped off. The trees were old, their roots digging deep into the hard ground, their branches reaching for a sky they'd never touch, just like me in a way. The days started like any other. A cup of black coffee, the bitter taste clinging to my tongue like the memory of a lost love. A few hours of solitude, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of my axe against the bark and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. But then I heard it. A sound that wasn't rain, wasn't wind, wasn't the natural song of the forest. It was a low growl, a guttural rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. I paused, axe raised, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by a sound I couldn't place, like the crunching of dry leaves under heavy paws. I dropped the axe, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no weapon, nothing but my own 2 feet and the instincts that had kept me alive this long. I ran, not knowing what I was running from, but knowing that whatever it was dangerous. The forest floor was slick with rain, my boots slipping on the wet leaves. I tripped over a fallen branch, the impact sending a jolt of pain through my ankle. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain. The growls were closer now, almost deafening. I could hear the creature's heavy breathing, the rasping sound like a bellows stoking a dying fire. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. I burst out of the forest and into a clearing, my lungs burning, my legs aching. A small cabin stood in the middle of the clearing, smoke curling from its chimney. It was the cabin of old Ezra, a hermit who lived deeper in the woods. I hammered on the door, my knuckles raw. Ezra opened it, his face a mask of surprise. "What the hell are you doing here, boy? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost," I gasped, collapsing onto Ezra's rickety chair. I told him what I'd heard, the growls, the crunching of leaves. Ezra listened, his expression grim. He went to the window, peered out into the darkness. "It's not a ghost, boy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's something much worse." I asked him what it was, but he just shook his head. "It's not for you to know," he said. "Just be glad you're alive." He made me a bed by the fire, gave me a blanket and a shot of whiskey. I stopped fitfully, haunted by the sounds of the forest. The next morning I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. Ezra was cooking breakfast, his face still drawn. "You're not going back out there today," he said. "Stay here, rest. It'll be gone by nightfall." I wanted to argue, to tell him I had a job to do. But the fear in his eyes silenced me. I spent the day in Ezra's cabin, listening to the rain and the wind. By nightfall the storm had passed. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Ezra told me it was safe to go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I thanked Ezra for his hospitality, grabbed my axe, and headed back into the woods. The forest was silent, the only sound my own footsteps on the damp leaves. I walked for hours, the moonlight filtering through the trees. I reached the spot where I'd been working the day before. The axe was still there, lying on the ground where I'd dropped it. I picked it up, my hand closing around the worn wooden handle. I felt a sense of comfort, a sense of control. But then I saw it. Footprints in the mud, large, animalistic prints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They led deeper into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. But curiosity, that old devil, got the better of me. I followed the prints, my axe held tight. The prints led me to a clearing, bathed in the moonlight. In the middle of the clearing was a creature, a hulking figure covered in dark fur. It stood on 2 legs, its back hunched, its head lowered. Its eyes glowed in the darkness like embers in a dying fire. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creature turned its head, its gaze locking onto mine. It let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the clearing. I raised my axe, my voice shaking. I warned, "I'm not afraid of you." The creature took a step forward, its claws digging into the earth. It was taller than me, broader, its muscles rippling under its fur. I knew then that I was no match for this creature. I turned and ran, the sounds of its growls echoing through the forest. I didn't stop running until I reached Ezra's cabin. I pounded on the door, my body shaking with fear. Ezra opened it, his face pale. "It's back," I gasped. "The creature, it's back." Ezra nodded grimly. "I know," he said. "I saw it." He led me inside, bolted the door. We spent the rest of the night huddled by the fire, listening to the sounds of the creature prowling outside. The next morning the creature was gone, but I knew it would be back. Ezra and I talked, and we decided to leave the woods. We packed our belongings, said goodbye to the cabin, and headed for town. We never went back. We never spoke of what we'd seen. But I never forgot the creature, the humanoid wolf that haunted my dreams. Years later, I heard rumors of a similar creature being sighted in other parts of the country. Some people called it a werewolf, others a skinwalker. I didn't know what to call it, but I knew it was real. And I knew it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. They say it's a creature of the night, drawn to the moon's light. They say it's a predator hunting for its next meal. They say it's a monster, a creature of pure evil. But I don't know what it is. I only know what I saw. And what I saw was enough to haunt me for the rest of my days. I always figured being a ranger in Yellowstone would be easy. Sure, you've got the idiots who want a pet bison, the crowds to manage, the occasional bear sighting to deal with, but I never thought it'd be this kind of dangerous. It was just a regular old patrol, one of those where you drive around checking the visitor centers, keeping an eye peeled for anything out of the ordinary. Hell, half the time, the drive itself is the highlight. I mean, this is Yellowstone we're talking about. Even the most boring day is still a damn postcard. But this ain't my first rodeo. Something felt off, not the spooky hair-raising kind of off, just quiet, too quiet. Even for this early spring, there's usually some more tourist traffic, some bird song, a chipmunk rustling in the leaves. Not today. Just this weird silence stretching out as I cruised along the road. It wasn't until I was near West Thumb that things took a turn for the worse. That's when I saw it. A park truck tipped on its side, the yellow door hanging open a little. Now that's not right. No way that happens on its own, even on these winding roads. I stopped my truck, hit the emergency flashers, and got out. My hand went to my gun almost instinctively. It was quiet, that same dead quiet as before. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I wasn't calling in. No time. Something told me this was trouble I had to handle myself. "Anybody there?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily into the empty woods. Nothing. I approached the truck cautiously, heart pounding like a rabbit in a snare. As I got closer, something else caught my attention. Big, muddy footprints. Real big footprints. A knot formed in my stomach. We get bears, sure, but something about the shape. Not right. Then I saw the blood smeared all over the truck, deep red and fresh. My skin prickled, and not from the cold. Whatever did this, it was close, maybe still watching. Glancing around, I noticed something else odd. Drag marks. Something large and heavy had been hauled off into the woods, leaving a trail of disturbed shrubs and dirt. Whatever it wasn't just some animal attack. I followed those marks, gun drawn and senses straining to pick up any sound. The damn woods were just too quiet, broken only by my own footsteps and the thumping of my pulse in my ears. The trail wound through trees, branches slapping against my face. Then I saw it. Not the thing that attacked, but the victim, half hidden under some bushes, was, well, what was left of a park ranger. The name tag said Jenkins. I didn't need to see his face to know it was bad. It was unnatural, something twisted and brutal. My stomach lurched, and my first instinct was to get the hell out of there, report it, call for backup. But then I looked back at those footprints, those clawed gashes in the earth. This wasn't a bear. Whatever did this, it was still out there, and it tasted blood. Rage surged through me, not just at the thing that killed Jenkins, but at myself. I'm meant to protect this place and the people in it. Well, it's time I start acting like it. I turned my back on Jenkins, and it twisted like a knife in my gut, but there wasn't anything I could do for him now. I followed the trail, adrenaline coursing through my body. The forest began to close in, trees getting thicker, and that sense of wrongness intensified. The footprints got sloppier, and signs of a struggle became more prominent. Snapped branches, trampled undergrowth. This was fresh, this was close. This was going down. A flicker of movement ahead, something massive in the shadows, something taller than any grizzly. The trees made it impossible to get a clear look, just glimpses of shaggy dark fur, and those damn footprints. I froze, gun raised, breath caught in my throat. It was hunched over, doing something, feeding. It was tearing into a hunk of something. Couldn't tell what. Didn't want to get close enough to find out. That was my chance. I could try to sneak past it, It turned. I swear it didn't have eyes. At least not like anything normal. It was too huge, at least 8 feet tall, standing with a build like a bodybuilder gone feral. It moved with a twitchy, unnatural grace, and I knew deep down this wasn't any kind of beast I'd ever learned about. It lunged. One moment it was across a clearing, the next it was almost right on top of me, a rank, musky smell washing over me. I fired wildly, barely able to see my attacker through the trees. The shot smacked loud against the flesh and the thing roared, a deep, guttural sound that made my knees buckle. I scrambled back, trying to find a clear line of sight as the monstrous figure charged again. I stumbled back until my legs hit a tree, gasping for air as pain erupted from my shoulder. This was it. This was how it ended. Maybe Jenkins felt this way. Outmatched. A wave of nausea washed over me. I couldn't go out like that, not like this. But what choice did I have? My gun was empty, dropped somewhere back there in the scramble. Every muscle burned, screaming for me to run, but there was nowhere left to run. This thing was fast, too fast. The creature stalked forward, a low growl rumbling in its throat. It moved with a predatory grace, muscles rippling under matted fur. Its mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I braced myself, waiting for that final surge, the crushing blow, the darkness. A sharp cracking sound shattered the silence. The creature faltered, its head whipping to the side. Another crack, and something thudded into the ground beside it. Then another, and another. Stones. Someone was throwing stones, big ones. The creature roared in fury, turning from me and launching itself towards the trees where the stones came from. My brain sputtered, trying to understand. Help? Here? Who the hell would... And then I saw her. A flash of red hair and green uniform, another ranger moving among the trees like a shadow. Johnson from the Old Faithful station. A small, wiry woman, but tough as nails. "Over here," she yelled, keeping her distance, her arm a blur as the stones continued to fly with deadly accuracy. The creature roared in frustration, unable to pinpoint her, and that bought me just enough time. Scrambling to my feet, I stumbled towards her voice, every nerve ending singing with pain. Johnson never stopped throwing, her aim true and precise, striking the lumbering creature over and over. I reached the relative safety of the trees, collapsing against a trunk as Johnson darted past me, leading the creature further into the woods. After her, I gasped out, "We can take it, together." Something flashed in Johnson's eyes for a moment, a flicker of doubt. But then she nodded and turned back, moving with the speed and silence of a predator herself. This wasn't about bravery, not really. It was about duty, about protecting people, even people like me who probably wouldn't have returned the favor. We stalked through the dense undergrowth, a strange mismatched hunting party. My injured shoulder throbbed and every creaking twig set my teeth on edge. Then I saw it, the creature pinned against a boulder by a pile of fallen branches. Johnson had been using her knowledge of the terrain, maneuvering it into a trap. A wave of grim satisfaction washed over me. Payback time. We both raised our guns. The shots echoed through the trees, sharp and final. The creature jerked and then went slack, the fight going out of it. Johnson and I approached it cautiously. Up close it was even more monstrous, its fur matted with blood and dirt, its oversized claws caked in gore. "What the hell is that thing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Johnson didn't answer. She just shook her head, her face pale. We spent the next few hours reporting the incident, calling for backup, securing the scene with a wide perimeter tape. Questions hammered at me from all sides. Fellow rangers, cops, even some higher-ups in suits. I stuck to the facts. What I saw, where I found Jenkins, how the attack went down. But when they asked about the thing, I could only describe its appearance. Nobody believed in monsters, of course, but nobody had a better answer. In the days that followed, the park became a war zone. Search parties combed the woods, helicopters thrummed overhead, trails were closed, tourists were herded out in droves, news crews swarmed in, buzzing around the site like flies. Some said it was an escaped bear, warped by radiation. Others whispered about secret government experiments gone wrong. A couple of Boulder tabloids even ran with the headline, "Bigfoot Lives." Johnson and I were kept out of the media frenzy, debriefed over and over, scrutinized, but they found nothing to discredit our story. The creature's body, what was left of it after the forensics team got to it, only added to the confusion. Turns out there's no record of anything quite like that in the scientific database. Closest they could figure was some type of mutated primate, deformed, feral. But the size, the aggression, they couldn't explain it. Life didn't go back to normal, not for me, not for Johnson. The whole park felt different after that, a shadow hanging over it. Jenkins got a somber funeral, a reminder of the cost of that day. Me and Johnson, we ended up with some half-hearted commendations and a few discreet therapy referrals. We got assigned to desk duty for a while, which suited me just fine. They never caught another one, not alive anyway. Every now and then there'd be a sighting, some blurry photo from a hiker, a mangled deer carcass. But the frenzy died down eventually. The park reopened, the tourists came back. Yet there's always that whisper of doubt in the back of my mind. Every rustle in the trees, every flicker of movement at the edge of my vision makes me tense up. I still work for the service. What else am I going to do? But when the sun starts to dip below the horizon and the shadows lengthen, I find myself itching to get back to headquarters for the night. The locals tell stories about the creature, the one they say got away. They just call it Bigfoot, but they say that with a kind of reverence and acknowledgement. The tourists think it's just old folklore, but me and Johnson, we know better. My name is Daniel Alejandro Moreno, and I am 31 years old, and this happened to me in 2008. I was a Navy SEAL stationed at a small outpost in northern Maine near the Canadian border. Our mission was classified something about intercepting a potential threat that was believed to be using the dense forests and the rough terrain to move undetected. I grew up in Texas, a long way from where I found myself on this mission. My childhood was pretty normal. I had a knack for sports and a curiosity for anything mechanical. I joined the Navy right out of high school, seeking adventure and a sense of purpose. Little did I know, the adventure I craved would take a turn into something I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. It was late October, the kind of cold that cuts right through you. The forests here were a mix of pines and bare-lined oaks, and the ground was littered with fallen leaves that crunched underfoot. We had been tracking unusual activity, signals we couldn't quite decipher. Our team consisted of 5 men, myself, Lieutenant Hank Marston, Corporal Liam Hayes, Petty Officer Rudy Sandoval, and our local guide, a man named Gus O'Brien. Gus was a rugged fellow, maybe in his late 40s, with a face weathered by the elements and a no-nonsense attitude. He knew these woods like the back of his hand and had been invaluable in navigating the terrain. We trusted him, not just because he was experienced, but because he had a quiet confidence that made you feel he could handle whatever came our way. One night we set up camp about 10 miles from the nearest town. We took turns on watch, and I had the midnight shift. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I stood there, scanning the tree line, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. I didn't think much of it at first while life was common here, but then I heard a strange, almost metallic sound, like metal scraping against stone. I nudged Hank, who was half asleep next to me. "You hear that?" He rubbed his eyes and listened. The sound came again, closer this time. We both grabbed our rifles and moved toward the noise, our boots making soft thuds on the forest floor. "Maybe it's just some animal," Hank whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. We pushed through the underbrush until we came to a small clearing. The moonlight cast an eerie glow, and in the center of the clearing stood something I still can't fully explain. It was humanoid, tall and thin, with long limbs that seemed almost too fragile to support its weight. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent white, and it had no discernible features, no eyes, no nose, just a blank, smooth face. It stood there, motionless, and for a moment I thought it might be some kind of statue. Then it moved. Its head turned toward us, and even without eyes, I felt like it was staring right through me. Hank and I raised our rifles, ready to fire, but something held us back. It was like an invisible force, a paralyzing fear that rooted us to the spot. Before I could respond, the thing bolted, moving with an unnatural speed and grace through the trees. We gave chase, our training kicking in despite the terror gripping us. We followed it for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the forest, until we lost it completely. Out of breath and frustrated, we made our way back to camp. Gus was waiting for us, his expression unreadable. "What did you see?" he asked. We described the creature, and to my surprise, Gus didn't seem shocked. Instead, he nodded slowly, like he had been expecting something like this. "I've heard stories," he said quietly. "Old tales from the indigenous people around here. They speak of a guardian, a spirit that protects these woods. But I've never seen it myself. Until now." We spent the next few days on high alert, but the creature didn't appear again. Our mission continued, though with a newfound tension that none of us could shake. We all knew something was out there, something beyond our understanding. One evening, while we were planning our next move, Rudy disappeared. One minute he was there, helping Gus prepare dinner, and the next he was gone. We searched the area, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. No tracks, no struggle, nothing. "Damn it, Rudy," Liam shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. "This isn't funny." But it wasn't a joke. Rudy was gone, and deep down we all feared the worst. We decided to split up and search in pairs, Hank with me and Liam with Gus. Hank and I headed east, our rifles at the ready. We moved quietly, listening for any sound that might indicate Rudy's whereabouts. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. "I don't know, but I don't like this. We need to find Rudy and get the hell out of here." We pressed on, calling Rudy's name every few minutes. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that made the forest even more sinister. Suddenly we heard a faint, muffled cry. We ran toward the sound, our hearts pounding. We found Rudy in a small, rocky hollow, his hands and feet bound with what looked like vines. His face was pale and his eyes wide with terror. "Get me out of here," he begged. Hank and I cut him loose, and as we did I noticed strange marks on his arms and legs, deep scratches that looked almost like claw marks. "What happened?" I asked, helping him to his feet. Rudy shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It took me, that thing. It came out of nowhere, grabbed me. I thought I was done for." We made our way back to camp, supporting Rudy between us. When we got there, Gus and Liam were already back, their faces grim. They had found something too, remnants of an old campsite, long abandoned, with the same strange claw marks on the trees nearby. "We need to leave," Gus said, his voice firm. "This place isn't safe." We didn't argue. We packed up our gear and started the trek back to civilization, moving as quickly as we could through the dense forest. The sense of urgency was palpable, and even though we were all trained to handle high-stress situations, this was different. This was something we couldn't fight, couldn't understand. As night fell, we decided to set up a temporary camp, too exhausted to keep going. We took turns keeping watch, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound, every shadow seemed to harbor the creature we had seen. Around midnight it happened again. Liam was on watch, and I was half asleep when I heard the gunshots, panicked bursts that jolted me awake. I grabbed my rifle and rushed to Liam's side, but it was too late. He was lying on the ground, his throat slashed, blood pooling around him. The creature was there, standing over him, its blank face turned toward me. I fired, emptying my clip into it, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. It moved toward me, and for a moment I thought I was done for. Then Gus appeared, holding a flare. He ignited it and thrust it toward the creature, which recoiled, hissing in a way that chilled me to the bone. The light from the flare seemed to hurt it, and it fled into the darkness. "We need to move now," Gus shouted, pulling me to my feet. We grabbed what we could carry and ran, Rudy limping beside us. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the forest, where the first hints of dawn were breaking through the trees. We collapsed on the ground, exhausted and shaken. Liam was dead, and we were all injured, but we were alive. We contacted our superiors, who sent a team to retrieve us and investigate what had happened. We were debriefed, our wounds treated, but the questions remained unanswered. What was that thing? Why did it attack us? The official report labeled it as an unknown threat, but that didn't even begin to cover it. We all went our separate ways after that mission. Hank transferred to a different unit, seeking a fresh start. Rudy took a medical discharge, his injuries too severe for him to continue. Gus went back to his life, but I doubt he ever set foot in those woods again. As for me, I stayed in the Navy for a while longer, but the experience changed me. The sense of invincibility I once had was gone, replaced by a cautious respect for the unknown. I eventually left the service, moved back to Texas, and started a quiet life away from the dangers of the world. But even now, all these years later, I can't forget. Sometimes in the dead of night I hear that metallic sound, that unnatural hiss, and I wonder, is it still out there, in those woods, waiting for its next victim? Or did we somehow put an end to its reign of terror? I guess I'll never know. My name is Daniel Ricardo Morales, and I'm 29 years old, and I'm the deputy sheriff in Crescent Falls, a town where nothing much happens. This story I'm about to tell you isn't one I've shared often. It happened back in 2018, and though years have passed, the events still haunt me. Not in a ghost story kind of way, but in the way they force me to remember every detail vividly, as if I'm still there. I moved to Crescent Falls with my wife Dana, and our 2 kids, Gabe and Emma, hoping for a quieter life away from the hustle of the city. Dana works at the local library and the kids go to the nearby school, making it a pretty typical small-town setup. But life has a way of turning the mundane into the extraordinary, and not always in a good way. It was just another Friday evening when everything started. I was on the late shift, patrolling the outskirts of town. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets. My radio crackled to life, and Carl, the dispatcher, came through. "Leon, we've got a 1057 over at the old mill. Possible missing person." The Bakers reported their son Max didn't come home after football practice. Max Baker was a good kid, always polite and hard-working. It wasn't like him to disappear without a word. I swung my cruiser around and headed to the mill, a decrepit building that had been shut down for years, standing as a decaying monument to the town's once thriving industry. I pulled up to the mill and saw Max's bike leaning against the rusted fence. The place was eerie, with broken windows and graffiti scrawled across the walls. I radioed in my location and started my search, flashlight in hand. The musty smell of rotting wood and mold hit me. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I had to watch my step to avoid falling through. I called out for Max, but only my echoes answered. After about 15 minutes of searching, I found his backpack near an old conveyor belt. The sight of it made my stomach knot. Just then, my radio crackled again. "Leon, we've got another report." Janice from the diner says her brother didn't come home either. Could be related. 2 missing kids in one night was more than a coincidence. I knew I had to keep looking, and fast. The old mill had several floors, each more decrepit than the last. As I climbed the rickety stairs, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over me. On the 3rd floor, I found something I didn't expect: a makeshift camp. There were empty food wrappers, a dirty blanket, and what looked like a journal. I flipped through the pages, but most of it was illegible, just scribbles and drawings. One word stood out, though: huntsman. Before I could make sense of it, a noise from behind startled me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, standing in the doorway, was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, gaunt, and his eyes had a wild, almost feral look. My hand instinctively reaching for my gun. The man just smiled, a chilling grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "Names don't matter here," he said, his voice raspy. "But you can call me Huntsman." My grip tightened on my gun. "What are you doing here? And where are the kids?" Huntsman took a step closer, his smile never wavering. "They're safe for now. But you, deputy, have a choice to make. You can try to save them, or you can save yourself, but you can't do both." His words were like a punch to the gut. I didn't have time to think. I lunged at him, hoping to subdue him and get some answers. But Huntsman was faster than he looked. He sidestepped my attack and shoved me into a wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and before I could recover, he was gone, vanished into the darkness. I scrambled to my feet and radioed for backup. "This is Deputy Tate. I need immediate assistance at the old mill. Suspect is dangerous and the missing kids are here." I didn't wait for a response. I knew time was running out. I resumed my search, moving faster now, driven by a mix of fear and determination. On the top floor, I found a trap door leading to the roof. It was partially open, and I could hear muffled voices from above. I climbed up, my heart pounding in my chest. On the roof, under the pale moonlight, I saw Max and Janice's brother Tim tied up and gagged. Standing over them was Huntsman holding a knife. "Let them go," I shouted, aiming my gun at him. Huntsman turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "You're too late, deputy. This is their fate, and you can't change it." I fired a warning shot into the air. "Last chance. Let them go or I will shoot." He laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Go ahead then. Shoot." Before I could react, he lunged at the kids, knife raised. I fired, hitting him in the shoulder. But it didn't stop him. He slashed at Max, who screamed in pain. I fired again, this time aiming for his leg. He dropped to the ground, the knife clattering away. I rushed forward and kicked the knife out of his reach. Tim was crying, his face pale with fear. I quickly untied both boys and called in their location. Within minutes, backup arrived and Huntsman was taken into custody. Max was bleeding badly from a deep cut on his arm. I did my best to staunch the flow until the paramedics arrived. The kids were safe, but the night's events left a mark on all of us. Back at the station, I tried to get answers from Huntsman, but he remained silent, his eerie smile never fading. The journal we found at the mill was examined, but it offered little insight, just more scribbles and the occasional coherent sentence about the hunt and sacrifice. Huntsman was identified as a drifter with no fixed address, a man who moved from town to town, leaving chaos in his wake. He had no known family, no connections, just a long history of violence and mental instability. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, media interviews, and community meetings. The town was shaken, but life slowly returned to normal. Dana and I tried to shield Gabe and Emma from the worst of it, but the story was all anyone could talk about for a while. Max recovered from his injuries, though the psychological scars would take longer to heal. Tim's family moved away shortly after the incident, unable to bear the memories of what happened. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling of failure. I saved the kids, but I couldn't prevent the trauma they endured. Huntsman was a reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in a quiet town like Crescent Falls. Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it often. Every time I drive past the old mill, I remember the fear in Max's eyes, the blood on my hands, and the man with the chilling smile. I keep my gun a little closer now, and I patrol the town with a renewed sense of vigilance. But as long as I'm around, I'll do everything I can to keep it at bay. One evening, about 6 months after the incident, I sat down with Dana over a cup of coffee. We talked about everything that had happened, about our fears and our hopes for the future. It was then that I realized something important. No matter how dark the world might seem, there is always light to be found in the people we love and the community we protect. We might not have all the answers, and we might never understand the full extent of Huntsman's madness, but we have each other, and sometimes that's enough to face whatever comes next. Life in Crescent Falls continued, marked by the occasional small-town drama, but mostly filled with the rhythms of daily life. I watched Gabe and Emma grow up, guided by the lessons learned from that fateful night. Dana and I grew closer, finding strength in our shared experiences and in our commitment to keeping our family safe. And so, the story of the Huntsman became one of the many tales whispered about in Crescent Falls, a reminder of the darkness that can touch even the most tranquil places. But it also became a testament to resilience, to the power of community, and to the enduring human spirit that refuses to be broken by fear. In the end, we all carry our scars, but it's how we choose to move forward that defines us. For me, I chose to embrace my role as a protector, to stand watch over my town, and to ensure that the shadows never again take us by surprise. This happened to me a while back during a short getaway to a cabin in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. My name's Othniel McKinney, and I'm just your average guy with an office job. That weekend, my buddy Marzel Dorsey and I took the trip for some relaxation and fishing. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, away from civilization. Red Feather Lakes was incredibly picturesque, but also eerily quiet. We loved it. At first, outside enjoying the pristine sunset, we laughed at Marzel's joke about his ex-girlfriend and noticed some people nearby starting their treks into the thick forest in search of adventure or solitude. Little did we know that this idyllic paradise held sinister secrets. A day after our arrival, we found ourselves exploring the surrounding area when we stumbled upon something that sent shivers down our spines. A bloody shirt hanging from a branch by itself. Our curiosity piqued. We decided to look for any more oddities. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the more unsettling things became. Trees appeared disfigured as if something had tried to pull them apart, evoking unnatural dread. As night approached, Marzel and I questioned if it was smart to venture further. A brief debate ensued until finally agreeing to return home before darkness engulfed us. Descending from an overgrown hilltop trail, I lost my footing and slid down into a hidden clearing, exposing me to gory evidence that would forever haunt my dreams. 3 mutilated bodies in varying states of decomposition. Suddenly, piercing grunts echoed through the trees. Something was near. Unable to tell how close or what manner of creature lurked in the dense woods, caused our adrenaline to surge. Clinging to each other in terror without thinking about calling for help, our phones didn't work out here. We had only 2 options, run or hide. We chose the latter, huddling beside a fallen tree obscured by foliage. As our breath slowed to measured silence, we saw the monstrous creatures approach. Quadrupedal, immense, and nightmarish, with a muscular frame that caused primal fear in our souls. Its body looked like a mutated wolf, yet vastly different. Intricate spines protruded from its back while mucus-like drool oozed from its enormous tooth-filled. The massive paws ended in sharp claws that left deep ravines wherever it stepped. Marzel and I exchanged panicked whispers about its capabilities, unable to grasp its purpose or how to fend it off logically. We couldn't outrun or fight it. Still shaking, we held on to each other while witnessing the abomination scour the area. "I don't know," I replied with tears welling up in my eyes, "but we can't stay here." When time felt like a distant concept, the creature moved slowly away from our hiding spot. We understood we needed to do something drastic, or become more victims of this relentless atrocity. Waiting for the agonizingly slow grunts and thuds to recede into the oppressive silence of the woods once more, Marzel and I emerged from beneath the foliage. With momentary solace, a new plan was forged: retrieve our rifles as a last-ditch effort before returning to relative safety. Stealthily making way back towards the cabin, we stopped dead in our tracks when an abrupt sound caught our eardrums, shrieks that could only be another ill-fated soul meeting their grisly demise at those gnarled claws and jagged teeth. Spinting towards safety now, whatever lingering caution relied upon only minutes ago evaporated into panic-fueled desperation. Marzel and I scrambled at breakneck pace, our lungs burning but determination overwhelming all sense of exhaustion. The creature's howls grew distant, but we couldn't shake the feeling it would be upon us in a heartbeat. We made it to the cabin, our rifles laid on the ground, waiting to be used. However, our hands shook violently. Our breaths came in short, sharp gasps as we prepared for battle. Marzel looked at me. "We need to call for help," he said decisively. Grabbing my phone, I found that I had no service. "We're stuck here," I told Marzel. No signal. An eerie silence fell between us. We both knew contacting anyone was now impossible. Despite our terror-stricken state, we knew our only hope lay in defending ourselves until daylight. Even with rifles by our side, we trembled at the thought of facing the creature alone. Hours passed, and the darkness grew heavier. With every passing moment, our fear intensified, Every distant howl or twig snapping sent shivers down our spines and increased the panic pumping through our veins. The hideous creature emerged from the darkness once again, its grotesque form reminiscent of a twisted, deathly wolf with matted fur and appendages too long and deformed for a natural-born animal. Its eyes held an evil intelligence beyond any wild beast's capabilities. As it stalked us relentlessly through the foggy night air, observing its deliberate and menacing gait, it could only be described as an abomination rather than an animal itself. It struck with fury as its deadly claws sliced through flesh and bone effortlessly, a far cry from any hunter's prey. When it finally reached us, our rifles did little in defense of this monstrosity tearing through us like tissue paper. The beast growled and licked its blood-stained muzzle, reveling in its victory over yet another human victim. Despite my growing shock and horror at the carnage before me, I knew we could not give up without a fight. There may have been other potential victims out there who could still be saved from this cruel fate that befell us. With desperation driving my actions, I rushed at the creature with newfound determination. Fear gripped every ounce of strength as I targeted its gruesome visage, attempting our last chance to bring this nightmare to an end or perish in the process. I slammed into the beast, surprising it with my attack. It reeled back, momentarily disoriented, but before it collected itself and retaliated, a horrifying scream echoed in the haunted woods. A scream belonging to Marzel. The creature had turned its attention towards my companion with murderous intent. Seeing Marcel suffer, torn limb from limb, sent waves of rage coursing through me like molten fury. Enough. Enough was finally enough. In one swift motion, I aimed my rifle at the creature and fired a shot that struck true. The explosion of gunfire echoed through the Nightmare's cape, accompanied by the most ear-splitting wail ever birthed on Earth from our sinister pursuer. One could only assume it was a skinwalker or perhaps a grotesque shapeshifter. But in reality, all that mattered was escaping this treacherous existence we found ourselves trapped within. Doing my best to avoid looking back at Marzel's lifeless form, sprawled amidst sanguine chaos decorating the forest floor beneath him, gone from this world too soon. Doubtful as I was about what had really happened here tonight, or what monstrous entity we had fought against, one certainty remained painfully clear. A friend is dead. Pushing on while honoring Marcel's bravery in our hearts, lest his sacrifice be in vain, knowing that whatever darkness we encountered will not be forgotten or forgiven easily. For as long as there are survivors left behind to tell their harrowing tale of survival against the twisted reflections of terror lurking in the hidden corners of our fragile planet, we must remember, and that will be our eternity. This happened to me a few years back when I was working construction in Wyoming. It's one of those places people forget about. Big sky, empty spaces. We were building a pipeline miles from the nearest town. My name's Brooks, by the way. City guy, originally. But the pay was good, so I figured I could put up with a little boondocks living for a while. The crew stayed in trailers out by the work site. Kind of isolated, but we had all the necessities. One night after a long shift, I was walking back to my trailer when I saw it, something big, slinking along the edge of the camp. At first I thought it was a huge dog. Then it stood on its hind legs, silhouetted against the moon, too tall, too lean, and the head all wrong. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. It sniffed the air, then turned its head to look right at me. Its eyes glowed yellow in the moonlight. A low growl rumbled from its throat. I turned and ran. Heard the thing charging after me, heavy paws pounding the dirt. I burst into my trailer, slammed the door shut and deadbolted it, hands shaking. Peered out the window, saw it circling the trailer for a few moments, snarling. Then it vanished back into the night. I barely slept. The next morning I told the foreman what had happened. He smirked, said I'd been hitting the cheap whiskey too hard. None of the other guys believed me either. Started thinking I might have imagined the whole thing. That changed a few days later. One of the crew, a guy named Flynn, didn't show up for work. We figured he was hungover. Then his empty trailer was found. It was trashed, blood splatter everywhere, and massive claw marks on the walls. No sign of Flynn. Search party went out. Cops got called. The whole deal. They never found him, never figured out what happened officially. But I knew. And after that, the vibe shifted on the site. People got nervous. The night noises seemed louder. The shadows seemed deeper. A couple of the guys swore they saw something watching the camp, but nobody wanted to admit what it might be. We started working in pairs, never went out alone. Floodlights stayed on all night around the site. I got myself a gun, even though I'd never fired one outside of a video game. The sense of something terrible lurking out there only grew stronger with each passing day. Then there was the night it came to the fence line. We were huddled in the canteen trailer after work. All of a sudden the floodlights flickered and went out. The place was plunged into darkness. We heard it then, pacing back and forth along the fence, growling. It sounded massive. Someone tried turning the lights back on. Nothing. Then came a scream from outside, cut abruptly short. Panic broke out. We huddled in the center of the trailer, clutching makeshift weapons. I had my gun, hands trembling. I knew that flimsy trailer wasn't going to stop the creature for long. The snarling just outside the thin wall grew louder, more enraged. We waited, breath held. I don't know how long passed. Minutes, hours. Gradually the noises faded until there was only silence. We didn't dare move until dawn broke. Creeping outside, we saw the carnage. The fence was ripped apart, more blood, and something else lying nearby. A wolf's carcass, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen, its throat torn out. That was our breaking point. The foreman called the company, said we weren't safe. They pulled the whole crew off the project. I left Wyoming that same day and never looked back. Some folks might not believe me, might say I made it up. The cops wrote it off as a mountain lion or a bear, even though the evidence didn't match. But ask anyone who worked on that pipeline if they recall what happened, and they'll go quiet, get that haunted look in their eyes. We all know what lurks out there in the wilds, things most people write off as myths. After that, I don't look at the woods the same. At night, if I hear a howl that sounds off, a chill goes through me. There was something out there in Wyoming, something old and hungry, and I reckon it's still out there, waiting. It was supposed to be just another weekend. You know, the kind where you blow off some steam with your friends, forget about the daily grind of flipping burgers and dealing with cranky customers. But little did I know, this particular weekend would change my life forever. My name's Jack, and I work at the local Burger King in a small town in Kentucky, right near the Tennessee border. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and more importantly, it's where I've met some of the best friends I could ask for. It was a Friday afternoon, and the summer heat was beating down mercilessly on the parking lot outside. I was just finishing up my shift, wiping down the counters and dreaming about the ice-cold beer waiting for me at home, when my best friend Kevin sauntered up, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Hey, Jack," he said, leaning against the counter. "What do you say we shake things up this weekend?" It was supposed to be just another weekend. You know, the kind where you blow off some steam with your friends, forget about the daily grind of flipping burgers and dealing with cranky customers. But little did I know, this particular weekend would change my life forever. My name's Jack, and I work at the local Burger King in a small town in Kentucky, right near the Tennessee border. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and more importantly, it's where I've met some of the best friends I could ask for. It was a Friday afternoon, and the summer heat was beating down mercilessly on the parking lot outside. I was just finishing up my shift, wiping down the counters and dreaming about the ice-cold beer waiting for me at home, when my best friend Kevin sauntered up, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Hey, Jack," he said, leaning against the counter. "What do you say we shake things up this weekend?" I raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Kevin grinned. "Camping trip. Just a bunch of us from work out in the woods, away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the grease-stained kitchen behind us. Now, I'm not exactly what you'd call an outdoorsy type. My idea of roughing it is when the AC in my apartment conks out. But there was something in Kevin's enthusiasm that was infectious. "Who else is going?" I asked, already feeling myself getting pulled into the idea. "Oh, you know, the usual suspects," Kevin replied. "Me, Lexi, Sean, Tia, Maddie, Eric, Bob, Haley, Brina, Dakota, and Kenzie. Oh, and you, of course," I whistled. "That's quite a crew. Where are we thinking of going?" Kevin's grin widened. I know this perfect spot. It's by a creek, real secluded. There's even a pay lake nearby if anyone feels like fishing. I mulled it over for a moment. A weekend away from the smell of fries and the sound of the drive-through speaker, it was starting to sound pretty damn good. All right, I said finally, I'm in. And just like that, our fate was sealed. The next day was a flurry of activity. We all met up in the Burger King parking lot, our cars loaded down with coolers, sleeping bags, and enough junk food to give a health inspector a heart attack. The excitement was palpable as we caravanned out of town, leaving behind the familiar landscape of fast food joints and strip malls. As we drove, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building in my chest. Maybe it was the promise of adventure, or maybe it was just the thrill of doing something different. Either way, I found myself actually looking forward to this little excursion. If only I had known what was waiting for us in those woods. The sun was just starting to dip below the tree line when we finally arrived at our destination. Kevin hadn't been exaggerating. The spot was perfect. A clearing by a babbling creek, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides. On the other side of the creek, a steep cliff rose up, its face scarred by years of erosion. Holy shit, Kev, I said as I climbed out of my truck. How'd you find this place? Kevin shrugged, a smug smile playing on his lips. I have my ways. Come on, let's get set up before it gets dark. We all sprang into action, unloading our gear and deciding on the best spots to park our cars. We decided to use our vehicles as makeshift tents, partly to save on packing space, and partly because none of us really knew how to set up a proper tent. As the others bustled around, I took a moment to really take in our surroundings. The creek gurgled peacefully, its clear water reflecting the oranges and pinks of the setting sun. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers, a far cry from the grease and disinfectant I was used to at work. Hey, daydreamer, Lexi's voice snapped me out of my reverie. You gonna help us get the fire going or what? I grinned sheepishly and joined the others in gathering firewood. Soon we had a respectable blaze going, its warm light pushing back the encroaching darkness. As night fell in earnest, we gathered around the fire, passing around beers and swapping stories. The mood was light, filled with laughter and good-natured ribbing. It felt good to see everyone so relaxed, so far removed from the stress of our day-to-day lives. Anyone got any ghost stories? Maddie piped up after a while, her eyes glinting mischievously in the firelight. There was a chorus of groans and laughs. Come on, Maddie, Eric said, rolling his eyes. We're not at summer camp. No, but we are in the middle of the woods, she countered. Perfect setting for a good scare, if you ask me. I chuckled, taking a swig of my beer. I don't know about ghost stories, but I did bring something that might make the night a little more interesting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a baggie of weed. A cheer went up around the campfire. Soon the air was thick with more than just wood smoke, and our laughter grew louder and more frequent. As the night wore on and the fire began to die down, people started drifting off to their cars to sleep. I found myself growing drowsy, the combination of beer, weed, and fresh air making my eyelids heavy. I'm going to turn in, I announced, stretching as I got to my feet. Night, Jack, Kevin called. Don't let the bedbugs bite. I flipped him off good-naturedly and made my way to my truck. As I settled into my sleeping bag in the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. This had been a good idea after all, I thought as I drifted off to sleep. Little did I know our peaceful night was about to take a terrifying turn. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I was jolted awake by a pressing need to pee. Groggily, I fumbled for my phone to check the time. The screen's harsh light made me squint. 3 a.m. Groaning quietly, I unzipped my sleeping bag and climbed out of the truck. The campsite was quiet, save for the gentle babbling of the creek and the occasional snore from one of the cars. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint warm glow over the clearing. I stumbled towards the creek, my eyes gradually adjusting to the darkness. As I reached the water's edge, I remembered the pay lake Kevin had mentioned. It was just across the bridge, wasn't it? Figuring I might as well check it out while I was up, I made my way across the rickety wooden structure. The pay lake was larger than I'd expected, its still surface reflecting the starry sky above. After taking care of business, I found myself lingering, captivated by the peaceful scene before me. The night air was cool on my skin, a welcome relief from the stuffy interior of my truck. As I stood there, enjoying the tranquility of the moment, something caught my eye at the edge of the woods, a shadow moving with purpose. At first I thought it might be one of our group, maybe out for a late-night stroll, but as I squinted into the darkness, a chill ran down my spine. The shape was all wrong, too big, too inhuman. My heart began to race. Without really thinking about it, I ducked behind the small building near the lake, my eyes never leaving the tree line. The shadow moved again, and this time I was sure. Whatever it wasn't human. Before I could process what I was seeing, a scream shattered the night silence. It came from the direction of our campsite. Adrenaline surged through me. My friends were in danger. I had to get back. Forgetting all about the strange shadow I'd seen, I sprinted back towards the bridge. I was halfway across when I saw it. Standing between me and the safety of our campsite was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to a person ended. The thing towered over me, easily 6 inches or more, its body a mass of rippling muscle covered in coarse brown fur. Its face was a grotesque blend of human and canine features, with the elongated snout like a German shepherd and pointed ears that swiveled towards me. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. Black and beady, they seemed to absorb what little light there was. Two bottomless pits of malevolence fixed squarely on me. I froze, my body refusing to obey my frantic mental commands to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a deer in headlights. The creature's mouth opened in what I can only describe as a grin, revealing rows of sharp yellowed teeth. Time seemed to stand still as we faced each other on that narrow bridge. I was acutely aware of every sound, the creek rushing below us, my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart in my ears. The creature tensed, preparing to lunge. In that moment I was certain I was about to die. And then, as if answering some desperate, unspoken prayer, salvation came in the form of a fist-sized rock. It struck the creature on the side of its head with a solid thunk. The beast yelped, a sound that was equal parts dog and man, and stumbled sideways. "Jack, run!" Kevin's voice cut through my paralysis. Without hesitation, the creature leapt off the bridge, disappearing into the dark waters of the creek below. I turned to see Kevin standing at the end of the bridge, another rock already in his hand. He was pale, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. What the fuck was that?" I managed to croak out as he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the campsite. Kevin just shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't know, man. I don't know." As we stumbled back into the clearing, I could see the others emerging from their cars, faces etched with confusion and fear. Maddie was sobbing, being comforted by Eric. Sean and Tia were huddled together, both looking shell-shocked. Without a word, I climbed into my truck and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the task. Through the windows, I could see the others gathering, talking in hushed, frantic tones, but I couldn't bring myself to join them, not yet. I sat there, every muscle in my body tense, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond our little circle of cars, and as the long hours of the night crawled by, I saw it, glimpses of a hulking shape moving in the shadows, glowing yellow eyes watching us from the top of the cliff. Sleep was impossible. All I could do was wait, praying for the sun to rise and chase away the terrors of the night. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. The night had passed without further incident, but the memory of what I'd seen on that bridge was burned into my mind. Slowly, cautiously, I emerged from my truck. The others were already gathered around the cold remains of our campfire, their faces pale and drawn. No one had slept much, it seemed. "All right," I said, my voice hoarse from the long night of silence. "I think we need to talk about what happened last night." There was a moment of hesitation, as if speaking about it might somehow make it more real. Then one by one they began to share their experiences. Sean went first, his arm wrapped protectively around Tia's shoulders. "We were sleeping in the car when something woke us up. It felt like the whole front of the car was being pushed down." He swallowed hard before continuing. "When I looked out the windshield, there was this thing. sitting on the hood like some kind of messed-up Spider-Man just staring in at us. Tia nodded, her face pale. Its eyes, they were so empty, soulless. What happened then? I prompted gently. It just left, Sean said, shaking his head in disbelief. One minute it was there, the next it was gone, and then we heard Maddie screaming. All eyes turned to Maddie, who was sitting on a log, her knees pulled up to her chest. Eric had his arm around her, his face a mask of concern. Maddie, I said softly, can you tell us what you saw? She took a shaky breath before speaking. I was in Eric's truck. We had the window cracked a bit for some air. I was on my phone when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When I shined my phone light on it, there was this huge, hairy hand reaching through the window. It had claws, like real claws. Eric picked up the story. As soon as Maddie screamed, we heard this growl, and then heavy footsteps running away from the truck. I nodded, piecing together the timeline in my head. That must have been when I was coming back from the pay lake. I saw it on the bridge. Kevin spoke up then, filling in the last piece of the puzzle. I woke up when I heard Maddie scream. I noticed Jack wasn't in his truck, so I went looking for him. That's when I saw that thing. It was about to attack Jack, so I grabbed the first thing I could find, a rock, and threw it. A heavy silence fell over the group as we all processed what we'd heard. It seemed impossible, like something out of a bad horror movie. But we'd all seen it, all experienced it in one way or another. What do you think it was? Brena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. I don't know. It was like a man, but not, bigger, stronger, and it had fur and a face like a dog, but I trailed off, unable to fully articulate the horror of what I'd seen. We need to get out of here, Dakota said firmly. Now. There were no arguments. In record time, we had packed up our gear and were in our cars, ready to leave this nightmare behind us. As we pulled out of the clearing, I couldn't help but take one last look back. In the full light of day, it all seemed so normal, so peaceful. But I knew the truth. Something was out there, something that defied explanation. The drive back to town was subdued, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. When we finally reached the familiar surroundings of our town, there was an unspoken agreement to meet up at the local diner. We needed to talk, to process what had happened. As we sat around a large table, nursing cups of strong coffee, the reality of our situation began to sink in. Should we tell someone? Haley asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over us. Bob snorted. Who would believe us? We'd be laughed out of town. He had a point. Our story sounded insane, even to us who had lived through it. Maybe it was just a bear, Kenzie suggested half-heartedly. A really big, weird-looking bear. But we all knew that wasn't true. What we had seen was no bear, no known animal. It was something else entirely. Whatever it was, I said finally, I think we need to keep this to ourselves, at least for now, until we can figure out what to do next. There were nods of agreement around the table. We made a pact then and there. What happened in those woods would stay between us. As we parted ways that afternoon, heading to our respective homes, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had been irrevocably changed. The world seemed different now, darker, full of hidden dangers I had never before considered. That night, as I lay in my bed, every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window made me tense. I kept seeing those glowing yellow eyes in the darkness, that grotesque grin full of sharp teeth. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. In my dreams, I was back on that bridge, facing down that monstrous creature. But this time there was no Kevin to save me, no escape from those clawed hands reaching for me. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart racing. As I lay there, trying to calm my breathing, a thought occurred to me, a thought that chilled me to my core. I apologize for the abrupt ending. You're right, I didn't finish the story. Let me continue and complete it for you. The creature had seen us. It knew our faces, our scents, and we weren't that far from where we'd encountered it. What if it decided to come looking for us? This thought haunted me in the days and weeks that followed. I found myself jumping at shadows, always looking over my shoulder. Work at Burger King became a welcome distraction, the mundane tasks of flipping burgers and taking orders helping to ground me in reality. But I could see the toll our experience was taking on the others too. Sean, usually the life of the party, became withdrawn and quiet. He'd flinch at sudden noises and spent most of his breaks staring blankly at his phone. Maddie had it the worst. She'd always been a bit high-strung, but now she was a bundle of raw nerves. More than once I caught her in tears in the break room, shaking uncontrollably. She eventually had to take a leave of absence, the stress of what she'd seen proving too much to bear. Kevin tried to keep our spirits up, cracking jokes and acting like everything was normal, but I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he'd scan the tree line whenever we were outside. We tried to go about our lives as if nothing had happened, but the memory of that night hung over us like a dark cloud. We'd get together sometimes, just the group of us who'd been there, and talk in hushed voices about what we'd seen. Theories were thrown around. Was it some kind of mutant, an undiscovered species, a government experiment gone wrong? But in the end we were left with more questions than answers. Weeks turned into months. As summer faded into fall, I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. That whatever we'd encountered had moved on, leaving us to slowly recover from our traumatic experience. But then came the night that shattered that fragile hope. It was a Friday evening and I was closing up the restaurant. The last customer had left and I was alone, wiping down the counters and thinking about nothing more than getting home to my bed. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl from somewhere outside. My blood ran cold. Slowly I turned towards the drive-through window. There, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot, stood the creature. It was just as I remembered, massive, fur-covered, with that terrifying blend of human and canine features. Its yellow eyes were fixed on me, filled with a terrible intelligence. For a long moment we stared at each other. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Then slowly, deliberately, the creature raised one clawed hand and pressed it against the window. The glass creaked under the pressure and I saw a hairline crack starting to form. That's what finally broke me out of my paralysis. I bolted for the back door, fumbling with my keys as I ran. Behind me I heard the sound of shattering glass and heavy footsteps. I made it to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of the creature in my rearview mirror. It was standing in the doorway of the restaurant watching me drive away. I drove aimlessly for hours, too terrified to go home. When the sun finally rose, I found myself parked outside Kevin's apartment. He took one look at my face and ushered me inside without a word. As I sat on his couch, a cup of strong coffee clutched in my trembling hands, I realized a terrible truth. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The creature had found me, had tracked me down. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it wouldn't stop until it had found all of us. We gathered the others, shared what had happened. The fear in their eyes mirrored my own. We were being hunted, and we had no idea how to stop it. In that moment, huddled together in Kevin's small living room, we made a decision. We couldn't keep running, couldn't live our lives looking over our shoulders. We had to find out what this thing was, where it came from, and most importantly, how to stop it. Our camping trip had been the beginning of something, not the end. And as I looked around at the scared but determined faces of my friends, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The creature was out there, watching, waiting. But we weren't going to be its prey any longer. It was time to turn the tables, to become the hunters instead of the hunted. As we began to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something bigger than we could imagine. But we had no choice. Our lives, and perhaps the lives of others, depended on us solving this mystery. The real adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. This happened to me a few years back when I was working as a wildlife photographer. I specialized in those getting back to nature shots for magazines and travel guides. Everyone thinks it's all beautiful sunsets and cute deer. They don't know the half of it. Anyway, my name's Derek. I'd been on assignment for nearly a month in Humboldt National Forest up in Northern California. Bigfoot territory, apparently, though personally I thought the entire legend was a load of bull. I was focused on getting some decent elk pics for a spread the editors were pushing. Those critters are majestic but skittish. They don't just pose for the camera, you know? One morning I decided to head up an old game trail that hadn't seen a human soul in ages. Maps showed it snaking through dense forest and up into higher elevations. Figured the elk might hide up there where it was quieter. I packed my heavy gear, water, snacks, the usual. Even with that weight on me, I still felt a surge of excitement. The wild always has that effect. The first few miles were uneventful. The sun filtered down through the dense canopy of trees, dappling the forest floor. Other than the buzzing of insects and the occasional bird call, the world was quiet. Too quiet. I brushed it off. Sometimes the critters sensed you before you sensed them, and the sudden silence was just the forest holding its breath. I came across a clearing where a small stream trickled down the hillside. It was a good spot to take a break. I dropped my pack and sat on a fallen log, reaching for my water. Then I saw them. They weren't elk. They were tracks. Huge tracks pressed into the soft earth by the stream. They were almost the size of dinner plates with long curving claws gouging out the mud. It wasn't a bear, that much was obvious, and no cat I'd ever seen left a print like that. I frowned. My skepticism regarding Bigfoot was starting to waver. Then, as if on cue, I heard a snap from the far end of the clearing. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something big was in those trees. I grabbed my camera and scanned the edge of the forest, heart pounding in my chest. From the shadows, a massive form slowly emerged. It was like a bear at first glance, but something was wrong. It was too tall, easily 8 feet when standing upright, and far more muscular. Its fur was dark and coarse, and it moved with an unsettlingly fluid grace. I was rooted to the spot, a strange mix of adrenaline and icy terror coursing through my veins. It stood there, head turning slightly as it fixed its gaze on me. And that's when I saw its face, like a wolf's, but bigger, broader, with a hint of human intelligence gleaming in its eyes. My hand shook as I fumbled to raise the camera. I needed proof, evidence no one could deny. The click of the shutter seemed to trigger it. With a blood-curdling roar, it charged. I was already running, scrambling to grab my pack as I barreled through the trees. The thing crashed through the undergrowth, startlingly fast for its size. The forest echoed with its savage snarls, each one jolting me with fresh fear. I pushed myself onward, branches whipping at my face. I stumbled out of the trees onto a narrow, winding road. It was dirt, probably used by logging trucks back in the day, long since reclaimed by the wild. A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. Maybe a car would pass, but the road looked deserted, stretching into the endless green in both directions. Which way to run? I was trapped between an unseen terror of the wild and an unknown fate on this deserted road. Panic was starting to devour my composure. I sprinted to the right, the sound of the creature's relentless pursuit closing in with alarming speed. My lungs burned, and a sharp stitch stabbed at my side, but I didn't dare slow down. I had to put distance between myself and that thing. Suddenly, a vehicle emerged from around the bend. An old Jeep, battered and rusty, chugging slowly along the rough road. I staggered into the center, waving my arms frantically. The Jeep screeched to a halt. The driver, a grizzled-looking guy with a scraggly beard, leaned out the window. "What the hell's the matter with you?" he barked. I gasped for breath, unable to form words. I pointed back toward the tree line. Creature. Big. In the woods. He looked at me like I was crazy. Then his eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me. You saw it." His rough voice dropped to a whisper. "The beast." Then I heard it. A guttural growl rising above the sound of the idling engine, followed by the crashing of branches as something huge tore through the forest. My blood ran cold. It was getting closer. The driver reacted with surprising speed. He slammed the Jeep into gear, tires spinning and spitting out gravel as he made a wild U-turn on the narrow road. "Get in," he yelled, his voice tense. I didn't question it. I scrambled into the passenger seat and slammed the door as the creature burst out of the forest. With a chilling snarl, it lunged for the Jeep, narrowly missing the rear bumper as we sped away. Hold on, the driver warned as he floored the gas pedal, the Jeep bouncing violently on the rutted road. I clung to my seat, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Fear coiled icy fingers around my throat. We careened around another bend, and I glanced back through the rear window. The creature was gaining ground with horrifying speed. Its long, powerful legs propelled it forward, each stride covering impossibly large distances. Faster, I choked out a desperate plea. This old thing's doing all she can, the driver grunted, his knuckles white where they gripped the steering wheel. Sweat beaded on his brow, and there was a grim look of determination in his eyes. That this wasn't his first encounter with the creature. "Who are you?" I gasped as the Jeep bounced over a particularly nasty pothole. "Cal, a hunter born and raised in these woods." His voice had a rough, no-nonsense quality to it. "And you got yourself into a hell of a mess, city boy. That thing, it ain't natural." The Jeep swerved wildly as Cal fought to control it on the rugged terrain. I could hear the creature's enraged snarls getting closer and closer. "What is it?" I shouted over the din. My voice sounded thin and panicked. "Locals call it the Dogman," he said grimly. "Beast walks on two legs like a man, stronger and faster than any critter you ever seen." He shot me a sidelong glance. "Most folks don't live to tell about it." The brutal truth of his words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We crested a hill and saw the town in the distance, a beacon of hope. I shouted in relief, but my joy was short-lived. Cal swore loudly. The road ahead was blocked. A massive tree lay across it, felled by some incredible force. There was no way even his ramshackle Jeep could make it over. We were trapped. Now what? I felt a surge of despair. We had nowhere to run. Cal slammed his fist on the dashboard but didn't reply. He reached under the seat and pulled out a battered rifle. "I brought you this far," he said, handing it to me. "Might buy us a few seconds. Get ready." He jammed the Jeep into park, yanked the keys from the ignition, and climbed out. That old rifle felt pitifully light in my hands. I'd only ever shot targets, never something alive, let alone something like the demonic creature bearing down on us. But I didn't have a choice. Cal was already positioning himself on the fallen tree, rifle raised. He looked more resigned than determined. The creature burst into view, its pace slowing as it reached the barrier. Moonlight gleamed on its fangs as it bared its teeth in a grotesque imitation of a smile. It had us cornered, and it knew it. Cal fired the first shot, the crack of gunfire echoing in the still night air. The creature stumbled slightly, but it didn't go down. It snarled and charged. I fired and fired again, squeezing my eyes shut with each shot. Fear and desperation warred within me. Then a blood-chilling howl pierced the night, and the creature staggered backwards. Its dark form slumped to the ground, twitching. Neither of us spoke. That the nightmare was over. Cal approached the creature cautiously, rifle still aimed. He nudged it with his boot, then let out a shaky breath. "It's dead." Relief washed over me so strongly my knees nearly buckled. We had survived. But at what cost? I stumbled out of the Jeep and stared at the creature. I would never forget those lifeless eyes staring back at me. The twisted mockery of a wolf and man. We didn't leave it there. Cal knew what would happen to the corpse. Scientists, publicity, endless questions we couldn't answer. We dragged it into the woods and buried it in a hastily dug grave. We made a silent pact to never speak of this night. I burned the photos I'd taken. My camera went missing on the way home. I didn't go back to wildlife photography. I couldn't. The memory of those glowing eyes still haunts my dreams. The world thinks those creatures are myths. They think wrong. I've seen the evil lurking in the shadows of the wild, and I know it's still out there. This happened to me a couple of years back. Still makes me look over my shoulder when I'm out and about, even in broad daylight. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy hiking as much as the next guy. Grew up in the suburbs, and you develop a love-hate relationship with the great outdoors. It calls to you this feeling of escaping the daily grind, but there's also the nagging thought that sometimes nature ain't so welcoming. My buddy Cade talked me into this specific trip. He's from Colorado, knows his way around a rock and a ridge. And Joel, by the way, city boy and self-proclaimed reluctant adventurer. We picked a place out there in Nevada, something called Basin and Range National Monument. Sounds scenic enough, right? Turns out it's known for being isolated, like way, way out of range. That should have been my first warning sign. First night, everything's chill. Kate sets up the RV while I make an attempt at getting a decent campfire going. Turns out surviving in the wild isn't my strong suit. It's just the two of us, miles from civilization, and I wouldn't mind admitting that this gives me the jitters. But we laugh it off. Beer helps settle my nerves. Things you know. Things started going wrong that second day. We set out on a planned route. Nothing too major, but enough to test my novice legs. It was mid-afternoon, a relentless sun hanging overhead. Suddenly, Cade pulls up short. In the middle of the trail, there's this shape. Looks like fabric soaked in, well, the unmistakable dark rust color of dried blood. Right beside it, half hidden in the dust, we spot a bone. I don't need a biology degree to tell it's not some deer that wandered off course. No, sir, this leg bone is way too thick, the joint massive. We back up slowly, trying to keep our cool. We don't talk much, just get back to the RV in double time. We decide to make it a short trip, get the heck out of there. But back at the camp spot it gets worse. My tires, all 4 of them, have been slash-cleaned through. Panic's a fist tightening in my chest. Cade checks his cell service. The little bars aren't there anymore. That's when we start hearing the noises. Not quite animal, not quite human. More of a rustling, punctuated by guttural grunts. I tell Cade I think it's coyotes, but even I don't buy it. They don't sound right. I grip a heavy flashlight, trying to feel less useless. There's no way Cade and I are sleeping out there that night. He packs us some supplies, and we set off. Aim is to walk down the road until we're hopefully within cell range. But that leg bone we spotted keeps flashing in my mind. Whatever got that animal isn't something I want to stumble onto in the dark, surrounded by these rock formations reaching up like crooked fingers. We walk as quietly as possible, no conversation, just listening intently for more of those eerie grunts. Hours and miles later, we hit a stroke of luck. There's a flickering of signal on Cade's phone. My adrenaline surges with hopeful relief, thinking he can finally call for help. But that fades almost immediately with the realization. We're still so remote, there's barely 1 bar. Cade manages to dial. Something might have broken through. An automated message, just a generic county emergency line. That's it. Signal flickers back out. Now what? This feels hopeless, but I have to admit, it feels better than sitting and waiting in that RV for another round with whatever made those horrifying noises. Dawn's our savior. Just enough light peeks through to see where we're going without stumbling into a cactus. Nevada deserts have plenty of those. Suddenly, Cade shouts a warning, and my foot instinctively halts inches from movement. I look down and freeze. There, right across the trail, fresh paw prints in the dirt. Big ones, easily double the size of a mountain lion. They're deep, and there's something off about the claws. Kane kneels down for a closer look, then looks up at me. We know this isn't natural, not some normal creature walking this land. Whatever left those prints, there's a feeling we shouldn't get in its way. The RV seems far, far behind us. But suddenly, that metal box holds an odd sense of safety compared to the vast landscape in front of us. The grunting started again, sounds closer now. Not gonna lie, fear gnaws at me like a rat. We break into a jog, ignoring the burning in our lungs. Cade glances back every once in a while, not sure if I could handle what he might spot, and we keep running, the grunts echoing ever closer. The landscape our prison. My mind races, 100 useless escape plans flashing and dying in my head. And somehow, the RV stands defiant as we scramble back across the dusty terrain. Cade shoves me inside, locking the door just as the sound of footsteps hits the ground outside. We huddle together, eyes widening as the first thud strikes against the side of the vehicle. Each successive one makes it shudder. I have this crazy image of it tipping over completely, sending us rolling with our predator. In the sliver of a moon filtering through the window, I see it. Just a glimpse because I ain't looking again. I can't take another look. It was enough to tell me that whatever it is, those grunts aren't animals. The way it moved wasn't right either. 2 legs, yes, but hunched in an unnatural way. The shoulders wider than its squat torso, head low to the ground like it could scent us like prey. My stomach churns and Bo threatens to rise up. The thuds against the RV continue, punctuated by that sound that has followed us, those awful, half-familiar grunts that are nothing short of chilling. That's the truth that hits hardest, that whatever creature made them almost sounds sort of human. but twisted, wrong, maybe even mocking us, savoring our fear. They continue long into the night. In the still silence of dawn, there's no sound. Kay dares to check outside. I stay crouched under the flimsy table. When he calls my name, his voice sounds thick with the horror I share. Something's different at our campsite. We find blood dragged across the dusty ground, splattered against the tires. But there's no body. I don't ask, because it's clear what happened. In a daze, we climb inside, and Kate gets the engine running. A passerby was our rescuer, flagged them down in a daze along the roadside. The police were the next stop. I'm sure those folks thought we were delusional, ranting about animal prints and things. The report, if there is one, probably describes it as a possible mountain lion attack with some good old-fashioned rambling hiker trauma on top. Don't blame them. I sure as hell wish I could buy this simple explanation. We never went back to Basin and Range. I ain't going back to any wilderness without at least 3 buddies and a satellite phone. You better believe I keep an eye out even around here in my safe suburb when the light starts to go dim, because something else lurks out there. This happened to me on October 3, 2003. I was working for the Sheriff's Department in Ellicott, a little town sandwiched between the swamps and bayou of southern Louisiana. Everyone knows everyone. The pace is slow, and alligators lurking in the waterways provide more excitement than most crimes. My name's Lucas Dubois. I'd put in 10 years at the department, and I'd just about seen it all. Bar fights, drunk drivers, a few domestic squabbles, but I was about as prepared for real darkness as a kindergartner in a war zone. That Friday night had started off regular enough. I'd spent a few hours at Missy's Diner, best sweet tea and gumbo in the county, trading gossip with the regulars. It was raining, a steady downpour of the sort that just soaks into your bones, and I contemplated pulling an early night when dispatch chirped over the radio. A distressed call from the old Moreau estate out near the edge of the swamp. Seemed someone's dog had gone missing. Now, I'll admit, lost pets usually aren't high priority, but the Moreaus weren't just anyone. Old Simon Moreau was practically Ellicott royalty. He came from old money, owned half the land in the parish, and while he lived like a recluse in that crumbling mansion of his, folks whispered about him, talked of strange lights out in the swamp at night, of unnatural screams echoing through the trees. Mostly they just called him old and crazy. But hey, when a man like that gets upset enough to call the cops, you go. I rolled up to the estate with the cruiser lights cutting through the rain like a knife. The gate hung open, creaking in the wind. As I pulled up the long, unkempt driveway, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. The house was a looming beast. Those old Victorian-style houses always give me the creeps. No lights were on, and an unnatural silence hung in the air. I radioed for backup, more out of protocol than any real expectation that trouble was brewing. I stepped out into the downpour and knocked on the massive oak door, my boots squelching in the muddy gravel. Getting no answer, I tried the handle. "Mr. Moreau?" I called out as I crossed the threshold into a gloom-choked foyer. My voice sounded hollow. Something was wrong. A sour smell hung in the air like rotted meat. I reached for the flashlight on my belt, my free hand hovering over my firearm. A crash echoed from the upper floors, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps descending the stairs. My heart began to pound. I readied my weapon in the flashlight, slowly moving deeper into the mansion's belly. Cobwebs clung to everything, the air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the stuttering beam piercing the darkness. Then I saw it. At first it was just a monstrous shape in the gloom, hunched at the foot of the stairs. Its height was unnatural, and it seemed to be hunched over something on the floor. As I got closer, the stench got worse, and the details started to pierce through the shadows. The creature was immense, over 7 feet tall, its body a mass of lean, corded muscle covered in slick black fur. Its clawed hands stained a crimson red, dripped with something I tried not to think about. Its head was like a wolf's, elongated, dripping fangs, and its eyes. Those eyes burned with fiery yellow intensity. For a moment time froze. Then it lifted its snout, fixed those terrible eyes on me, and let loose a guttural snarl that sent shivers down my spine. I fumbled for my radio. Shots fired need urgent backup at the Moreau residence. I screamed into the mouthpiece, even as I raised my gun and fired. The creature let out a roar that echoed around the mansion like a thunderclap as the bullets connected. It reared back, clutching its chest, blood seeping between its claws. Seizing the moment I turned and bolted, I could hear the creature gaining on me, its footsteps heavy and quick. Bursting through the front door, I stumbled out into the rain. Behind me, I heard glass shatter. As I fumbled for my car keys, a monstrous form blurred across the overgrown lawn toward. I jumped into the cruiser, slamming the door shut as the creature reached the vehicle. It slammed against the side windows, its claws rattling the door handle. I fumbled with the keys, finally getting the ignition going. I screeched out of the driveway, tires spinning out in the mud, never taking my eyes off the creature that was bounding after me, gaining ground at an alarming rate. I keyed the radio again, voice shaking. In pursuit of unknown hostile entity approaching Highway 17. Just as I reached the main road, I saw flashing lights ahead. Back up. I didn't even have time to feel relief before a blur of fur and teeth slammed into the side of my cruiser, sending it veering wildly. The world spun, metal screamed, and then darkness. I came to a while later, my head throbbing. The cruiser was flipped on its side, the windows gone, rain lashing the interior. Through the cracked windshield and the flashing lights of the approaching sirens, I saw the creature crouch several yards away. It stared directly at me, its expression a chilling mix of fury and something akin to satisfaction. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a wild animal, wasn't just some rabid dog. There was intelligence in those glowing eyes, and as the sirens wailed louder, it turned and vanished into the night, leaving me to face the questions, the fear, and whatever was going to happen next. I was 18 when it happened. The memories of that day are etched into my mind, as vivid and terrifying now as they were then. My name is Alex, and I grew up in the dense, pine-scented woods of Colorado. Our family home was a rustic cabin, nestled in a clearing that always seemed to be on the edge of wilderness, no matter how long we'd lived there. That fall, I was beyond excited for my annual hunting trip with my dad. It was a tradition we'd started when I was old enough to handle a rifle, and over the years it had become more than just a hunt. It was our time, father and son, away from the distractions of the modern world, connecting with nature and each other in a way that felt almost primal. The night before we left, I could barely sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind filled with visions of majestic elk and the thrill of the hunt. When my alarm finally went off at 4 a.m., I was already wide awake, practically vibrating with anticipation. Dad was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He gave me a nod and a smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. We moved around each other with the easy familiarity of a well-practiced routine, packing the last of our gear into the truck. Mom came down just as we were about to leave, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She hugged us both, making us promise for the 100th time to be careful. I know, Dad said, his voice gruff but affectionate. We'll be back tomorrow evening, safe and sound. As we pulled out of the driveway, the first hints of dawn were just starting to lighten the eastern sky. The truck's headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating the winding dirt road that led deeper into the forest. I watched as our home disappeared in the rearview mirror, feeling that familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that always came with these trips. The drive to our hunting spot took about 2 hours, most of it on increasingly rough and narrow forest roads. We passed the time talking about school, my plans for college, and Dad's work at the lumber mill. It was comfortable, easy conversation, the kind that only happens when you're truly at ease with someone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the forest around us came to life. Birds called to each other in the canopy above, and more than once we spotted deer watching us warily from the tree line. Each sighting sent a jolt of excitement through me. This was going to be a good hunt, I could feel it. Finally, we arrived at our destination, a small clearing near a bubbling creek, surrounded by towering pines and aspens just starting to turn gold with the changing season. As soon as Dad cut the engine, I was out of the truck, breathing in the crisp mountain air. All right, let's get camp set up, Dad said, already pulling our gear from the truck bed. The sooner we're done, the sooner we can start tracking. We worked efficiently, setting up our tent and organizing our supplies. By the time we were done, the sun was high in the sky, warming the clearing and making the dew on the grass sparkle like diamonds. Dad checked his watch. It's almost noon. What do you say we grab some lunch, then head out for an afternoon hunt? I nodded eagerly, already reaching for my pack. As we sat on fallen logs, munching on sandwiches and apples, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. This right here was perfect. Just me and my dad, surrounded by the beauty of nature, about to embark on a hunt. If only I had known then how this day would end, how it would change everything. But in that moment, as we finished our lunch and shouldered our rifles, all I felt was pure, unadulterated excitement. "Ready?" Dad asked, his eyes twinkling with the same enthusiasm I felt. "Born ready," I replied with a grin, and with that, we set off into the woods, unaware of the horror that awaited us. The forest enveloped us as we left our campsite, the sounds of civilization fading away until all we could hear was the crunch of leaves under our boots and the whisper of wind through the trees. Dad took the lead, his movements sure and silent. I followed, trying my best to mimic his stealthy gait. We'd been walking for about an hour when we heard the first howls. They echoed through the trees, a haunting chorus of wolves and coyotes. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but Dad seemed unperturbed. "Nothing to worry about," he said, noticing my unease. "They're far off. It's the bears we need to watch out for." I nodded, grateful for his calm demeanor. We'd encountered black bears before on our trips, and while they were generally more afraid of us than we were of them, the thought of running into a grizzly was enough to keep me on edge. As we climbed higher into the mountains, the forest began to thin out, giving way to rocky outcroppings and stunning vistas. When we reached the top of a particularly steep incline, Dad held up a hand, signaling me to stop. "Let's take a breather," he said, his breath slightly labored. "And while we're at it, might as well see if we can call anything in." He pulled out his elk call, a simple tube that, in the right hands, could produce a sound eerily similar to a bull elk's bugle. As he brought it to his lips, I scanned the surrounding area, my rifle at the ready. The call echoed across the mountainside, a long haunting note that seemed to hang in the air. We waited in tense silence, straining our ears for any response. Minutes ticked by. Just as I was about to suggest we move on, we heard it, the distant sound of movement, branches cracking under heavy hooves. My heart leapt into my throat as a small herd of elk emerged from the tree line below us. "Females," Dad whispered, a note of disappointment in his voice. "No bulls yet, but where there are cows, bulls are sure to follow." We watched the herd for a while, admiring their grace as they moved through the underbrush. Even though we couldn't take a shot, there was something magical about seeing these majestic creatures up close in their natural habitat. As the herd moved on, we continued our trek, periodically stopping to call again. The afternoon wore on, and while we saw plenty of signs of game tracks, droppings, areas where animals had bedded down, we had yet to spot our quarry. That's when things started to get strange. We were following a game trail when Dad suddenly stopped short. I nearly ran into him, caught off guard by his abrupt halt. "Look," he said, pointing to a nearby tree stump. At first I didn't see what had caught his attention. Then my eyes focused on what was sitting atop the stump, a pair of antlers, their points reaching skyward like gnarled fingers. "Huh," Dad mused, approaching the stump for a closer look. "Must have been another hunter here recently." But something about the scene didn't sit right with me. "Dad," I said slowly, "what kind of hunter leaves antlers behind after a successful hunt?" He frowned, considering my words. "Good point. Maybe they were in a hurry, or—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Well, no use speculating. Let's keep moving." As we continued down the trail, we kept spotting more antlers, some from deer, others from elk. They were everywhere, perched on stumps, hanging from low branches, even arranged in bizarre patterns on the forest floor. An uneasy feeling began to creep over me. The woods, which had seemed so familiar and welcoming just hours ago, now felt alien and threatening. Even the quality of the light seemed to have changed, taking on a sickly greenish tinge that made the shadows deeper and more ominous. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think we should head back to camp." He nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, I think you're right, son. Something's not right here." We turned back, retracing our steps as quickly and quietly as we could. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but there was never anything there. Just as the paranoia was reaching a fever pitch, we spotted movement ahead. My heart leapt into my throat, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of excitement as I recognized the shape of a bull elk. Dad and I exchanged a quick glance. This was what we'd come for. All thoughts of the strange antlers and unsettling atmosphere vanished as we dropped into hunting mode. We crouched low, moving forward with agonizing slowness. I raised my rifle, centering the crosshairs on the elk's chest. I took a deep breath, steadying my aim. The shot rang out, impossibly loud in the stillness of the forest. The elk dropped where it stood, a clean kill. As we approached our prize, I felt a mix of emotions. Pride at the successful hunt, sadness for the fallen animal, and a lingering unease that I couldn't quite shake. Little did I know, this successful hunt was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. With the elk field dressed and packed for transport, we made our way back to camp. The walk was arduous, weighed down as we were with our prize, but there was a sense of accomplishment that made the burden feel lighter. By the time we reached our clearing, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and pink. Dad immediately set about starting a fire and preparing our dinner, while I organized our gear. As we sat around the campfire, savoring the fruits of our labor and sharing stories of hunts past, I found myself relaxing for the first time since we'd encountered those strange antlers. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of a full stomach, and the familiar presence of my father all worked to ease the tension that had built up over the course of the afternoon. But as night fell in earnest, that nagging sense of unease returned. The darkness seemed to press in around our little circle of firelight, and the usual nighttime sounds of the forest were eerily absent. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Remember those antlers we saw earlier?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Been thinking about that myself. In all my years hunting these woods, I've never seen anything like it." I reached into my pack and pulled out one of the smaller sets we'd collected along the way. "What do you think it means?" Dad shook his head slowly. "I don't know, son. Could be nothing. Could be." He trailed off, his gaze fixed on something beyond the firelight. That's when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the darkness beyond our camp. We both froze, straining our eyes to penetrate the gloom. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then I saw them, a pair of antlers, impossibly high off the ground, at least 8 feet up, and below them 2 eyes that glowed with an unnatural yellowish light. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling, "do you see that?" He didn't respond, but I saw his hand slowly, carefully reaching for his rifle. The creature stepped into the firelight, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, like nothing that should exist outside of nightmares. Its body was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every way. The skin was a sickly gray color, stretched tight over a frame that seemed to be mostly bone. Long, spindly arms ended in hands tipped with razor-sharp claws. But it was the head that truly terrified me, a wolf's skull, yellowed and cracked, with human-like teeth that gleamed in the firelight. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, we all stood frozen, me, my father, and this thing. Then it let out a roar that shook me to my very core, a sound that was part animal fury, part human anguish. Dad was the first to react. In one fluid motion, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, deafeningly loud in the confined space of our camp. The creature screeched in pain, a sound so horrible it made my ears ring. But instead of fleeing, it charged towards us with inhuman speed. "Run!" Dad yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the tree line. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us I could hear the creature pursuing, its heavy footfalls and ragged breathing getting closer by the second. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I had no idea where we were going, no plan beyond getting away from that monstrous thing. Suddenly, Dad pulled me behind a large boulder. We pressed ourselves against the cold stone, trying to quiet our ragged breathing. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, so loud I was sure the creature would hear it too. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain that at any moment those claws would tear into us. But then the sound began to fade. The creature had run past our hiding spot. We waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. When we were sure it was gone, Dad gestured for us to move. We made our way back to camp as quietly as we could, every sense on high alert. When we finally broke through the tree line into our clearing, we didn't waste a second. We threw our gear into the truck haphazardly, not bothering to pack properly. Every moment we lingered felt like tempting fate. The drive home was a blur. Dad pushed the truck to its limits on the winding forest roads, and I kept expecting to see glowing eyes in the rearview mirror at any moment. It wasn't until we pulled into our driveway, the familiar sight of our cabin a balm to my frayed nerves, that I finally allowed myself to believe we had escaped. Mom met us at the door, her face creased with worry. "What happened?" she asked, taking in our disheveled appearance and wild eyes. Dad hesitated for a moment before replying. We had a run-in with an aggressive grizzly, but we're okay. We're safe now." I knew why he lied. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? Who would believe us? That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that skull-like face, those glowing eyes. I heard that unearthly roar. In the months that followed, we never spoke about what happened that night. We never went back to that hunting spot, but sometimes I'd catch Dad staring off into the woods with a troubled look in his eyes, and I knew he was remembering too. It took a long time before I felt comfortable in the woods again. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something is out there, watching and waiting. Some nights, when the wind howls through the trees and shadows dance on my bedroom wall, I find myself wondering, what was that creature? Where did it come from? And most chillingly, is it still out there? I've done research since then, pored over folklore and legends, and I've come to believe that what my father and I encountered that night was something ancient and terrifying, a Wendigo. But belief doesn't make it any less frightening. If anything, it makes it worse. Because if Wendigos are real, what else might be lurking in the dark corners of our world? One thing's for certain, I'll never look at the woods the same way again. And if you're ever out there in the wild places where civilization fades away, keep your eyes open. And if you see antlers where they shouldn't be or hear footsteps following you in the night, run. Run and don't look back. Because some things in this world are better left unencountered, and some hunts, well, some hunts turn the hunter into the hunted. About a year ago in late November or early December, I was going on a camping trip. I left early in the morning because in Finland the sun doesn't come up during winter, so I had a few hours of light before complete darkness. When I left, I had taken my hunting knife and my hunting rifle and a Exarta gas can with me. At first I was just riding around the woods, and about 20 kilometers in the woods I started to smell a horrible odor. I gagged because I had never smelt such a horrible smell, even though I go hunting for moose every year and find rotting corpses. I started looking for the source of the smell but could not find it. Soon, just going around, the smell disappeared. I just shrugged it off and kept moving. A few hours later, I had gotten to my target for a camp. When I had gotten my camp up, I decided to check the gas in my snowmobile and realized that it was almost empty, so I started to fill it up with my extra gas can. When it started to get dark and cold, I got the fire going and started resting. Some info about my campsite. The area I chose to camp at was a small clearing, so I could see all around me clearly if there was light. There were thick woods all around me at about 200 m away from my camp. After it had gotten dark, my fire was starting to go out, so I ran to the edge of the woods to get some firewood and went back to the camp. I managed to save the fire, but the smell from earlier came back. I wanted to leave because of the smell, But it was too dark now to go on the small trail, and I would get easily lost if I lost the trail, so I decided to stay put and just handle the smell. Over time, I realized that the smell was getting worse for a bit, but then it stopped getting closer at the edge of the woods. I grabbed my headlamp from my bag and put it on, and my heart dropped. I heard the voice of my cousin, who lives 100 kilometers away. When I looked around, I saw a red eye glint at the edge of the woods. I decided to pack up and leave, but right before I was able to start up my snowmobile, I heard really fast footsteps in the snow, and something pulled me off the snowmobile. It started dragging me to the woods with incredible strength. I had my knife of my belt, so I grabbed it and stabbed the thing in the hand, and it let go and let out a horrible scream like a woman and an elk combined. I still had my headlamp on and looked at the thing, and I saw this half-rotten wolf-like thing running away. I was horrified. It had dragged me into the woods in a couple of seconds from 200 meters away. I started running back to the snowmobile, and when I reached it, I surtered, pulling on the cord. When it finally started, I just sped off, leaving half of my stuff that flew off with me when the thing pulled me off. I still had my rifle with me on a handle I made for it on the snowmobile. I was speeding way too fast on the small trail, and I started hearing screaming around me as if there were more of them, and keeping up with a snowmobile on hard snow moving over 80 kilometers per h. I reached a long starlight in the trail, so I locked the gas on full and grabbed my rifle and fired into the woods at the screams and hoped it would hit one of them. I fired 3 shots, but I don't think any of them hit. At one point, the screams just stopped. I kept riding home, and after about an hour of riding, I finally reached my home. I just ran in and locked all the doors and windows. I think I passes out of pure terror because I remember waking up the next day at 10:26. I grabbed my rifle off the ground and went outside. When I checked my snowmobile, I saw a patch of pure black hair stuck on the hook at the back and saw big claw marks on the back of the snowmobile. I started walking back to my house and saw that there were similar claw marks on my front door. I realized that they never went away and followed me home. They know where I live, but luckily to this day I haven't seen, heard, or smelled them again. I haven't told anyone about this because skinwalkers or wendigos aren't supposed to be a thing in Finland. And every time I hear the voice of my cousin, I'm reminded of that trip. I have stopped hunting and have moved to the closest city called Rovaniemi. I still do not visit the forest to this day. That trip really traumatized me.